This video showcases multiple fantastic narrators and creators here on YouTube and features a story by yours truly. These creators I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last several years. I hope you enjoy their stories and appreciate the differences between us all. But remember that we all share the commonality of passion for storytelling. Today we will be weaving tales that explore various strange and paranormal topics. Thank you so much for your time. And please give these creators some love. Make sure to share, subscribe, and leave us a comment below. Now, let us begin.
When police arrived at the house in Bothell, Washington in 2012, they found a message burned into the living room wall. 3 letters that were in this black soot. D-I-E. And the man who called the police was standing in his driveway, barefoot, hands blistered. His girlfriend was still screaming inside. He told police that something had been living in the house with him for 8 months, and that it wanted them dead. His name was Keith Linder, and 8 months earlier, he had no idea what was waiting for him in that house. Okay, so on a cool afternoon in February 2012, Keith Linder stood in the driveway of a modest 2-story house just outside Seattle, Washington. The house was in Bothell, a quiet suburban neighborhood where people knew their neighbors. And, the kids rode bikes in the street. But, just a little foreshadowing, which I hate to do. Bothell is spelled B-O-T-H-E-L-L. I just thought I'd tell you that. So Keith was 48 years old. He worked in technology, the tech field. And he was finally moving in with his girlfriend Tina after years of dating. This felt like a new chapter to him. The rent was reasonable. The landlord seemed nice. The house had 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a backyard with a fence. It was perfect. And Keith was also deeply religious. He'd grown up Baptist, read his Bible every morning, and made sure that before he even unpacked the furniture, he placed a cross in every single room. 1 in the living room above the TV, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in each bedroom. And he kept 3 Bibles in the house at all times. 1 of them was on his nightstand, 1 of them was on the coffee table, and 1 of them he kept deep in the basement. Tina thought it was a little much, but she didn't say anything. That was just Keith. And as they move in, the first month is totally normal. They painted the walls, they hung up pictures. Tina planted flowers in the backyard. Keith set up his home office in 1 of the spare bedrooms. Totally normal. In fact, everything just felt right. But then, early March, Keith started hearing something at night. It sounded like this scratching almost. Like something was dragging its nails across wood. And it was coming from inside the walls. So logically, at first, of course, he thought it was mice. So he set traps. But nothing ever got caught, and the scratching continued. And it always happened at the same time, right around 3 a.m. Keith would wake up, and there it was. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Sometimes right behind his headboard, so he would turn on the light and it would stop. So he turned the light off, and within minutes, it would restart again. And one night, in late March, Keith woke up just after 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. And when he walked past the living room, he stopped. The cross above the TV was upside down, literally like in a movie. And the Bible on the coffee table was open, and he always kept it closed. He always did. So he checked the nail on the wall, and it was tight. There was no way that cross could have flipped on its own. So he tries not to scare himself too much, and he goes back to bed. And when he wakes up the next morning, he tells Tina. And she said maybe, he had bumped into it and didn't even realize. and Keith really didn't argue, but he knew something was off. Then, in early April, Keith came home from work and found every cabinet in the kitchen wide open. Upper cabinets, lower cabinets, the pantry. Tina wasn't even home, and when he called her, she said she'd been at work all day. That night, he set up a camera in the kitchen, and at 3:17 a.m., it happened again. Keith woke up to this loud bang from downstairs, so he ran to the kitchen. Every cabinet again was open. He checked the footage, and what he saw made his stomach turn. At exactly 3:14 a.m., one cabinet door slowly started to open, then another, opening one by one in sequence. No hands, no wires. Then, at 3:17 a.m., one door slammed shut so hard that the camera shook. So, as you could imagine, this is hard to believe, right? But Keith ended up showing the footage the next day to Tina, and she watched it twice. She didn't say anything at first, and then she said, maybe it's the house settling. Everybody always says that, it's settling, which is true. Houses do settle, and they make creaks and all this stuff. And then she said maybe there's a draft, and Keith kind of just stared at her. A draft does not open cabinets in sequence. A draft doesn't slam a door hard enough to shake a camera. But things got worse. A week later, Keith was just sitting on the couch watching TV when he felt it move. Not a little shift. The entire couch slid 3 feet across the floor. He jumped up and looked around, of course, and no one else was in the room. The couch had just literally moved on its own. And when he looked down at the floor, he could see the drag marks in the carpet. Yes, once again, this is a real story. Later that day, Tina saw the marks, and she could not explain them, obviously. But she also didn't want to talk about it. Just like most people, if they can't control it, they don't even want to think about it. So she started staying at her mom's house just a few nights a week to kind of get it out of her mind. But she said it was because her mom needed help with something. But Keith knew. She was scared, and so was he. And in May, Keith woke up to this new thing. It was a smell, something burning. So he ran downstairs and he found his Bible on the coffee table smoking. Not on fire, just smoking. Like someone had almost held a lighter to the back of the cover. The edges were singed black, and when he picked it up, it was warm to the touch. He threw it in the sink and turned on the water. And right there, that's when he saw it. On the wall, behind the couch, written in what looked like dark soot, 3 letters, D-I-E. But Keith didn't notice in that moment what else had changed in the room while he slept. So just imagine seeing D-I-E. What would you do? Well, let me know in the comments. Because Keith called the police, and they came. They took photos. They asked if he had any enemies. Keith said no. They asked if anyone else had access to the house. He said no. And they wrote up a report.
It says D-I-E.
One of the officers told Keith that it looked like it was just a prank. Maybe some kids broke in. But Keith had checked every door and window before calling. Everything was locked from the inside. So they left, and Keith knew what they were thinking, that he had done it himself. But that's when Keith started posting his videos online. The cabinet footage, the couch moving, photos of the burned Bible, photos of the writing on the wall. And the comments, of course, came flooding in.
Fake, staged attention seeker.
A popular ghost hunting channel did a breakdown video calling Keith a fraud. So Keith reached out to local paranormal investigators, and most of them just ignored him. So he contacted priests, and one of them came to the house, looked around for 10 minutes, and said that they did not sense anything evil. He suggested that Keith go and see a therapist. So Keith called the landlord about an exorcism, and the landlord said no. While all this is going on, Tina moves out in June. She packed her things while Keith was at work and left a note on the counter. Keith knew what that meant. She believed him, and she couldn't handle it anymore. And now Keith was alone in this house. He'd sit on that couch, the same couch that slid across the floor, and realized he had no one to call, nobody who believed him at all. The police thought that he was staging it. The internet thought that he was a liar. Tina was gone. The priest wouldn't help. And whatever was in the house with him knew it. Keith wasn't scared of ghosts anymore. He was scared of losing his mind, of becoming the guy everybody laughed at. So he prayed harder. He slept less. He ate almost nothing. And he'd lost 15 pounds in just 2 months. His hands would shake when he tried to type at work. His boss would ask if everything was okay at home, and Keith just said yes, but it wasn't, because every night at 3 a.m. the whispers came back, and the activity got worse. He'd come home to find furniture now fully rearranged. He'd hear footsteps walking circles around his bed at night. He'd wake up to the sound of someone whispering his name. And it always happened at 3 a.m. Always. Then one night in July, Keith was lying in bed when he heard it. His name, whispered right next to his ear. Keith. He didn't move. He didn't open his eyes. He just laid there waiting for it to stop. But then he felt something. It was this pressure that was on his chest, like someone was pressing down on him. He couldn't breathe. He tried to move his arms, but they wouldn't respond. And then he heard it again, louder this time. He forced his eyes open, and he looked at the foot of his bed. And that's when he saw something standing there watching him sleep. And what it was, well, it was a shadow. Tall, dark, humanoid, but wrong. It had no features, just a shape. And it was staring at him. Keith screamed, and the shadow didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Let me know in the comments right now if this is when you would move, or if you would have already moved. Because at this point, the thing leaned forward, closer to Keith's face. And that's when Keith ran. Literally, he grabbed his phone and he ran out of the house barefoot. He sat in his car until sunrise. And when he finally went back inside, he found something new on his wall. Not DIE this time, something worse, written in that same black soot. It said, "I'm not done." So Keith didn't know what to do. His lease wasn't up until 2013. He'd already lost Tina. He lost credibility, and nobody in Seattle would help him. He was completely alone. He was broke. He was terrified. And whatever was in that house knew it. But then in August, Keith woke up to find a message in his inbox. "You've got mail." It was from a man named Steve Mera, and the subject line read, "You're not crazy, but you are in danger." Steve was a paranormal investigator from the UK. He'd been researching cases in the Pacific Northwest and came across Keith's videos. He said he had seen a lot of fakes in his 30 years of investigating. And he said that Keith's videos looked fake too. They looked fake. But there was something about them that bothered him. Little details that didn't add up if Keith was staging everything. Steve said he had investigated over 300 cases, and only twice had he seen activity like what Keith was documenting. Both times the people involved ended up in the hospital. So Steve wanted to come to Seattle with his partner Don Phillips and they wanted to stay in the house for a few days and see for themselves. And if Keith was telling the truth, they would help him. But if he was lying, they would expose him. And Keith said yes, immediately. And then Steve and Dawn flew in on August 23rd, 2012. They brought EMF meters, infrared cameras, and audio recorders. They set everything up and told Keith just to act normal, just go about your day. And they would, monitor the equipment and see what happened. And the first night, nothing happened. Steve and Dawn sat in the living room watching the meters. Everything was quiet. They told Keith that was normal. Most hauntings don't perform on command. So Keith went to bed around midnight and Steve and Dawn stayed up. At 3:11 in the morning, Steve looked down at his watch and yawned. He was about to suggest that they call it a night when every single EMF meter in the house started screaming all at once. So Steve and Dawn jumped up and grabbed their cameras. Their meters were spiking. The readings were off the charts. And then they heard it. A loud crash from the basement. So they ran downstairs and found books scattered all over the floor. An entire bookshelf had been emptied. And the books weren't just on the ground. They were thrown. Some were 15 feet away from the shelf. Steve and Dawn checked their cameras. The footage showed the books flying off the shelf one by one. No hands, no wires, just flying, which is impossible, right? And then we get to the audio recorder. They heard something. A voice. It was faint, but it was clear. And it said,
"Get out."
They played it back for Keith the next morning, and Keith's face went white. Because the voice on the recording sounded exactly like Keith. And over the next 3 nights, they recorded more voices. Dawn was in the basement adjusting a camera when he heard scratches right above him. He looked up at the ceiling and saw something dark crawling across the beams. This is getting crazy and scary. He said it was something that moved wrong. He backed out and then wouldn't go down there again. And when Steve asked what he saw, Dawn just shook his head. He said he saw it and that was enough. On the 4th night, every light bulb in the house shattered at the same time. All of them. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, basement. Steve and Dawn were standing in the dark with glass all around them. And that's when they heard it again, the whispering. Keith, 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 over and over and over. On the 5th day, Steve and Dawn packed up their equipment and left. And before they got in their rental car, Steve turned to Keith. He put his hand on Keith's shoulder, and his voice was quiet, almost like he didn't want the house to hear him. And he said, quote,
"In 30 years, I've never seen anything like this. It knows your name, it knows you're alone, and it's not going to stop."
Keith then asked what it wanted, and Steve didn't have an answer. He just got in the car and he drove away. So Keith ended up moving out. In September 2012, it's like the house won. He broke his lease and paid the penalty. He didn't care. He just needed to leave. He moved into a small apartment across town and tried to rebuild his life. But it wasn't over. He still heard the whisper sometimes. He still woke up at 3 a.m. for no reason. And on those nights, he would check his walls just in case, and his health started to decline again. Migraines this time. Plus anxiety and insomnia, and he would have these panic attacks in the middle of grocery stores. His doctor couldn't find anything physically wrong with him. But Keith knew whatever had been in that house had broken something inside him that could not be fixed. So, Steve, Mara, and Dawn Phillips published their findings in a report called The Bothell Hell House. They included photos, video, and audio evidence. They concluded that the activity in Keith's house was genuine and possibly demonic in nature. The report got some attention in paranormal circles, but most people still did not believe it. The house in Bothell is still there. It's been rented several times since Keith left, but tenants never stay long. Some leave just after a week or two. Others make it a month or two. The landlord eventually stopped asking why people kept breaking their leases, and he just started offering shorter rental terms. Keith Linder still lives in Washington. He wrote a book about his experience. He does interviews sometimes, and he always says the same thing. Whatever was in that house followed me. I still hear it. I still see it. And I don't think it's ever gonna leave me alone. And the last thing written on Keith's wall before he moved out was, "I'm not done." The house in Bothell is still there. You can look it up. The address is public. The landlord still lists it online if you want to stay there. But if you decide to stay there, just remember what that demon told Keith before he left. "I'm not done." May 18th, 1953, Manila City Hall in the Philippines. Mayor Arsenio Lacson sits across from an 18-year-old girl in a holding room. She is trembling, pale, and terrified. For 9 days, she has been screaming in her jail cell that invisible creatures are biting her. The guards think she's insane. The doctors are baffled. But Mayor Lacson is here to see it for himself. He reaches across the table and takes her hand. And then, right in front of his eyes, fresh bite marks appear on her neck. Human teeth marks, deep, bleeding. He's still holding her hand. She couldn't have done it herself. Within 15 minutes, more marks appear on her finger, the one he's holding. The mayor, the doctors, the reporters in the room, they all see it happen, and nobody can explain it. Her name is Clarita Villanueva, and over the next few days, her story will make international headlines as the first documented case of demonic possession in Asia.
What's going on, guys? I am Mr. E-Files. I tell stories of the mysterious, twisted, and paranormal. I just want to give a huge shout out to Mystery Archives. He literally is helping younger channels like mine grow. So for that, let's just hit the like button. What do you say?
Clarita grew up in Bacolod City in the Philippines. And by the time, sadly, she was just 18 years old, both of her parents were dead. You see, weirdly, her mother had been a fortune teller involved in what locals called witchcraft. And when she died, Clarita was left alone with nothing. No family, no money, and no education. So she did what thousands of desperate women did in 1950s Manila. She went to the capital looking for work. She found a job as a maid. And it didn't pay much, but it was enough just to survive. And then she fell in love. She met a man who promised her the world. So they got married, and she finally felt like she found someone who truly wanted her. That is until she discovered that he was already married. So heartbroken and jobless at this point, Clarita did what she had to do to survive. She became a club dancer. And then, sadly, when that wasn't enough, she turned to street work, if you know what I mean. And by early 1953, she was homeless, sleeping on street corners in the Malate district of Manila. But on May 6th, 1953, while sleeping on the sidewalk, Clarita allegedly offered services to a plainclothes police officer. So she was arrested on the spot for vagrancy and then thrown into Bilibid prison, a 300-year-old colonial jail in the heart of Manila. Guys, I want you to think about this. She was only 18 years old. She was alone and forgotten. And 3 days later, something found her. So 3 days later, May 9th, 1953, at 10 p.m., Clarita and other inmates had just finished praying the rosary, a nightly ritual in that prison. So she was laying in her bunk, trying to fall asleep, when she felt something land on her chest. It was heavy, it was cold, and it was breathing. So she opened her eyes and she saw nothing. but she felt it, sitting on top of her, like pinning her down. And then it bit her. This sharp pain, like fangs, seeping into her arm. So Clarita screamed, and the guards then rushed down to her cell to see what was going on. And they found her, just imagine looking at a woman in a prison cell thrashing, clawing at her own body, yelling that they were biting her. So the guards obviously looked around, they looked at the situation, and then to break the tension, they laughed. And they thought, another crazy inmate just looking for attention. But then they saw the marks. And these weren't old marks by any means. These were fresh bite marks, human-shaped, on her arms, her neck, and her legs. And they were deep. She was bleeding. Impossible to self-inflict, especially the ones on her back and on the back of her neck. Think about it. That would be impossible to do. How could you bite yourself in the back of the neck? And obviously, with all of this going on, Clarita was hysterical. She described what was attacking her, though. And she said, quote, "It was a very big, dark man with curly hair all over his body. And then there was another one with an angelic face and a big mustache." So there were two creatures, and they were invisible to every single person but her. And they came back every single night. And over the next 9 days, things tremendously escalated. So Clarita would scream. She would writhe in pain, laugh as if being tickled, and then suddenly cry out in pain as new bite marks appeared throughout her body. Her cellmates literally watched it happen. They saw the marks in real time, like invisible teeth sinking into her flesh. But then, the craziest part, guards, doctors, nurses, everyone who came to help her saw the exact same thing. They saw the marks being made at that moment, at that second. And it astonished everybody. So at this point, Dr. Mariana Lara, the chief medical examiner for Manila, was called in. And he examined Clarita multiple times. He confirmed the bite marks were real. They were human-shaped, too large and round to be self-inflicted. Dr. Lara said, quote,
"These are otherworldly. They're too large and the pattern is wrong. Human bites are elliptical. These are perfectly round."
So clearly his mind was blown, and that's when psychiatrists were brought in, and they diagnosed Clarita with hysterical psychoneurosis. I hope I said that correctly. And that is a mental condition that mimics possession. And then, of course, there were others that said she had epilepsy, and she was biting herself in these dissociative states. Now, given this diagnosis, still none of them could explain how she was biting the back of her own neck, or how the marks would appear while doctors were holding her hands and watching it in real time. They thought it was some sort of magic trick. How could that possibly be a magic trick, or could it be? Well, I'll let you decide in the comments, but before you do, listen to this. Because then there was other stuff, the things that couldn't be explained by psychology. Clarita would drink from empty cups when guards refused to give her water. She became violently aggressive toward religious images, trying to smash a statue of the Virgin Mary in her cell. And also a really crazy part of all of this, remember she's 18, is that she spoke in languages she didn't know. Clarita only spoke Tagalog and Visayan. I hope I said that right, Visayan. But during the attacks, she would scream insults in perfect English. So of course, this type of situation happening, the news spread very fast. I mean, local papers picked up the story, and then international wire services came in, and through the front pages of all these magazines and papers would be "Girl attacked by invisible fangs." And that became a global sensation in 1953. And Mayor Arsenio Lacson, he was a skeptic, a tough politician who did not believe in ghosts or demons. He decided to go and see it for himself. So I'm going to take you to May 18th, 1953, 9 days after the attacks. Mayor Laxon was furious. This story was making Manila look like a city of superstitious fools. He was convinced it was all just a magic trick or a hoax. So he ordered Clarita to be brought to his office in City Hall. And he wanted doctors, reporters, and officials present. He wanted to expose the truth once and for all. So everybody agreed. So they went and they got Clarita, and Clarita was brought in. She was shaking, she was pale, and she was barely able to stand up at this point. Mayor Laxon sat down next to her. He grabbed her by her hand firmly so she kind of would stop shaking. And that's when he looked deep into her eyes and he just said, "Show me." And that's when 5 minutes went by. 10 minutes went by. He started to get impatient and think it was all fake. But then 15 minutes went by and something happened. All of a sudden, 15 minutes in, these fresh bite marks appeared on her neck, then on her index finger, the one that the mayor was holding. Mayor Laxon, a skeptic, watched it happen. He felt her hand twitch. He saw the skin redden and swell, and he watched the teeth marks from like something was biting down hard, but there was nobody there. So the doctors in the room examined the marks immediately, tried to figure out exactly what this can be. And they confirmed that yes, they are fresh. They did happen that minute. And they confirmed that the matches were human bite patterns. So clearly at this point, Mayor Laxon was actually visibly shaken. And he told reporters, quote, "I don't know what this is, but it's real. I saw it. She could not have done this by herself." He even joked darkly to this creature, whatever it was. And he said, "If you're going to bite people, go bite President Quirino instead." I'm guessing that was his opponent at the time. So Clarita at this point, she is still in this trance-like state, whispering in Tagalog. "Akra rin, ibigratin, kakatin. You too. They want to bite you." And over 100 doctors, psychiatrists, journalists, and officials observed Clarita over the next few days. And guess what? Not a single one can explain it. They had no medicine, no answers. Psychology had no answers either. And the attacks were only getting worse. One doctor, though, Dr. Ramos, was particularly vocal. He was convinced that Clarita was faking it. So he confronted her in her cell, accusing her of making all of this up for attention. So Clarita, who was in the middle of an attack, turned and looked at him. And her eyes were different. They were cold and empty. And she spoke slowly. "You will die." Dr. Ramos kind of shocked a little bit, but he laughs it off. But then the next day, at that exact hour, Dr. Ramos collapsed. Heart attack. Dead. Nobody could explain it. I mean, he was healthy. No history of heart problems at all. And it was at that very minute, that moment, that all the doctors stopped calling this a hoax. Mayor Laxon desperately reached out to the Archbishop of Manila and the rector of the University of Santo Tomas, the most powerful Catholic institutions that were in that country. And he begged them to perform an exorcism. But they refused. The Catholic Church did not believe in public exorcisms anymore. It was too medieval, too embarrassing for the church. But word of Clarita's case had reached someone else. Someone willing to step in where the church wouldn't. And it was an American evangelist named Lester Sumrall. Lester Sumrall was in Manila building a Protestant church, the Manila Bethel Temple. And he heard about Clarita on the radio. And he said that later the Holy Spirit wouldn't let him ignore it. So for 3 days he prayed and he fasted. He begged God to send someone else. But nobody came. So on May 19th, Sumrall went to Bilbid prison and asked to go and see Clarita. So the guards, They went and they brought her to a room. And the moment she saw Sumral, she screamed. "I hate you," she shrieked, in perfect English, by the way. And remember, Clarita only spoke Tagalog. Sumral immediately began to pray. He called in the name of Jesus and commanded the demons to leave. And that's when Clarita convulsed and she started thrashing. Her voice even changed. Deeper, guttural, cursing Sumral in ways that made the guards even step back. Not a joke. And then suddenly she went quiet. And everybody thought it was over. But it wasn't. So Sumral returned the next day and the day after that. And each time the attacks grew more violent. Clarita would laugh, scream, and then fall unconscious. Fresh bite marks would appear during the prayers, as if the creatures were fighting back in some way. And on the third day, May 21st, 1953, Sumral gathered a group of Christians in the prison, and they sang hymns. They broke bread together, and they prayed for hours. Finally, Sumral stood over Clarita and declared, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I bind every power of the devil and command you to be free from this moment. In the name of Jesus." And suddenly, Clarita sat up. Her eyes cleared. She pointed out to the window. "He went that way," she said. "He's gone." She was right. From that point onward, the attacks stopped immediately, permanently. Clarita was examined again and again. No new marks, no more screaming, no more invisible fangs. 3 days of prayer succeeded where 9 days of medicine and psychology had failed. Clarita Villanueva was released from prison shortly after. The international press covered the story extensively. "Girl freed from demon possession," and it became a global headline. And Lester Sumral wrote a book about it called Bitten by Devils, The True Story of Clarita Villanueva. And it sold tens of thousands of copies and launched his ministry across Southeast Asia. He claimed 150,000 people converted to Christianity in the Philippines as a result of Clarita's story. And in exchange for his involvement, Mayor Lacson gave Sumral a permit to build his church, the Manila Bethel Temple, which today is called the Cathedral of Praise, which over 24,000 members attend to. But here is where it gets complicated. In 1967, 14 years later, Clarita Villanueva appeared at a government office in Nuevo Ecija, requesting help recovering royalties from people who profited from her life history. Because she was poor, forgotten, and people had made money off of her suffering. And whether Sumral ever paid her anything is truly unclear. So, of course, skeptics point to this and say the whole thing was a publicity stunt, it was fake. That Clarita and Sumral fabricated it all for fame and fortune. But here is the problem with that theory. Well, over 100 doctors, officials, and witnesses, including skeptical Mayor Lacson, watched the bite marks appear in real time. Medical examiner Dr. Mariano Lara documented it officially. And not one single person involved in it could ever prove that it was a hoax. So when most people say they're battling demons, they mean trauma, they mean addiction and depression. Clarita Villanueva battled demons. Literally. These invisible creatures with fangs that bit her in front of doctors, mayors, and reporters. And for 9 days, medicine could not help her. Psychology could not explain it. The Catholic Church refused to intervene. But when an evangelist prayed over her repeatedly, somehow the attack stopped. So skeptics will say it was mass hysteria, mass delusion, a publicity stunt. Believers say it's a miracle. But here's what nobody disputes. A teenage girl, homeless, forgotten, and powerless, faced something that terrified everyone who witnessed it. And somehow, she survived. And in case you want to really see this in real detail, in 2019, a Filipino horror film was made about Clarita's story. And in 2023, her case was featured on national television in the Philippines. Over 70 years later, and people still can't explain what happened in that jail cell. But Clarita can. She battled demons, and she won.
It was New Year's Eve, and Shannon Rogers was sitting in the living room with her son Jamie, getting ready to count down for the new year. Shannon had a glass of champagne, and Jamie had a glass of his favourite sparkling water. They toasted, clinked glasses, and began the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Shannon hugged her son and wished him a happy new year. But when she looked at her son, when she looked at his face, he wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, Jamie looked terrified. Jamie looked over his mother's shoulder and said, "Mummy, what's that behind you?" Usually, when I research a case, I'll watch various YouTube videos and read online articles. I'll read books if there are any available. But in this case, I came across the series A Ghost Ruined My Life by Eli Roth. I've only watched the first 2 episodes, and I have to say they're pretty creepy. I was particularly intrigued by the Shannon Rogers story. It had everything a good ghost story should have. So, I watched the show and made notes for my script. But when I researched further into the case, I found an interview with Shannon on the YouTube channel CARC Universal. It's a great interview, definitely worth a watch. I'll link it below for you to watch for yourself. The first thing I noticed was how different Shannon looks on the podcast, even though it was a few years later. She looks younger, healthier, and generally much happier. But she did give reasons for that during the interview. So when asked about the show and whether she regretted doing the show, she kind of had mixed emotions. Obviously, the show opened new doors for her and gave her more options to explore career-wise, but in her personal life, it wasn't really a positive experience. For starters, a few of the main scenes in the show were depicted very differently to how they played out in real life. And Shannon would say there really was no reason for them to do this, as the true story was pretty terrifying in itself, if not scarier. So, I think what we'll do for this episode is I'll go through the haunting scene by scene telling the story. Then any parts that Shannon said they'd got wrong, we'll talk about what actually happened. Here we go. In 2011, single mother Shannon Rogers moved into a house in 555 Sydenham Road, southwestern USA with her 3-year-old son, Jamie. In familiar fashion, it was her dream home and a fresh new start. Almost. The house itself was very large and spacious with plenty of room for Jamie to play, but it was also slightly outdated or retro as Shannon would put it and in desperate need of some TLC. This was reflected in the rental fees, which were questionably low, and of course I'm sure we can all have a good guess as to why that might have been. Shannon had a job as a bartender 3 days per week, so finances were tight. All in all, she felt very lucky for the opportunity. The house had a good energy with mostly positive vibes. It was almost as if it had fallen into her lap. I guess some things are just meant to be. On the day of moving in, she had some help from her daughter, Madison Rogers, and Madison's boyfriend, Ed. In an interview, Madison said, "When you pulled up, the house is a beautiful neighbourhood out by the lake. Peaceful, very nice, full of nature, perfect place." When they started to explore the house, they found that the previous tenants had left lots of their belongings behind, including an old guitar. This is important to the story, as we'll find out later on. So, as they started unpacking boxes and finding places for their belongings, they started decorating the Christmas tree at the same time, because, you know, priorities and all that. Got to get the Christmas decorations up before anything else. Among their own belongings, they unboxed a Christmas musical box which played a cute rendition of "Oh Christmas Tree." They pondered on a place to set the musical box and decided that it looked perfect on the mantelpiece in the living room. They also found this hanging Christmas pendulum decoration which they hung in pride of place at the front centre of the Christmas tree. Now, I think that this pendulum was already at the house when they moved in, so it must have belonged to the previous owners. Well, that's what I presume anyway. Madison and Ed had gone home, and Shannon was unpacking boxes in the kitchen, finding places in the cupboards and drawers for plates, dishes, cutlery, etc. So, as she's packing everything away, she hears Jamie talking in the living room. It sounded like he was speaking to someone, but she could only hear his voice. She knew he was in there alone, so who the hell was he talking to? She stopped what she was doing and listened intently. She could clearly hear Jamie say, No, you can't do that. We live here now. This is our house. We can share, okay?" Shannon walked into the living room just out of curiosity to see what Jamie was doing. You know, there was no real cause for concern at this point. Although, that was about to change. So she walks in and sees Jamie sitting facing the Christmas tree. So his back is to her and he seems to be talking to someone over by the tree. But there's no one there. So now Shannon's kind of thinking, okay, this is a bit weird. She asks Jamie who he's talking to, and Jamie doesn't respond. He just sits there, still facing the Christmas tree. He doesn't turn and acknowledge Shannon. He just sits there, giggling, mesmerised by something, which is creepy as hell. That's when Shannon noticed that the pendulum decoration that they'd hung on the tree was swaying back and forth on its own. Jamie had been sat on the floor the whole time, and there was no breeze in the house. In fact, none of the other Christmas decorations were swaying at all, only that one. Shannon said that she's definitely a spiritual person, and not long after moving in, she could definitely feel a presence around the house. She'd found out from the landlord that an old lady had lived in the house and had passed away years ago. Shannon said she felt that her spirit was still there because it was her home, but her presence was very comforting and welcoming. She really felt at peace with the presence of the old lady. She never actually saw an apparition of her, but she got the sense that she was a short, stocky old lady with greyish blonde hair, and she was kind of giving off this aura of pride, like, this is my house, I did this all on my own and I'm very proud. So, at this point, nothing else had been mentioned about anyone else dying in the house, which may or may not have been true, technically speaking, as we're about to find out. One night, just before Christmas, Shannon and Jamie were sitting on the floor in the living room eating Christmas cookies and drinking milk while talking to Shannon's mother on the phone. Everything at this point was still relatively peaceful and normal. For now. Madison said in the interview that she didn't really believe that there was a spirit in the house at this point and wasn't fazed by the little things that were happening. She didn't take suggestions of the paranormal seriously. Well, let's just say Madison very soon changed her stance where that's concerned. Now, this next scene, personally, I found really creepy because of what happened, but also because of the way the scene was filmed. It was New Year's Eve, it was late in the evening, and once again Shannon was sitting at the living room table with Jamie. Shannon had a glass of champagne, and Jamie had a glass of his favourite sparkling water just before the New Year countdown. They were getting ready to celebrate the New Year, talking about all the things they wanted to do together in the New Year, setting little New Year's resolutions, things like that. And midnight was fast approaching, so they got ready to begin the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Shannon popped a cork and gave Jamie a big hug. It was a very happy, special moment between a mother and her little boy. She wished him a very happy New Year. But when Shannon sat back and looked at Jamie, she noticed that his expression very quickly went from one of joy and happiness to one of worry. Literally, 1 second he was smiling and the next he looked like he was about to burst into tears. Obviously now very concerned, Shannon asked Jamie what was wrong. To which Jamie simply responded, "Mummy, what's that behind you?" as he looked over her shoulder. A chill ran down Shannon's spine, as you might expect. She turned and looked through the archway between the living room and the dining room. From where they were sitting, she could see into the pitch black dining room. I mean, it was literally pure darkness. It's a very ominous scene. She could see absolutely nothing there. Jamie was looking increasingly scared. His expression had gone from worry to pure fear. They sat there just staring into the darkness when, without warning, the room was filled with an awful loud banging sound which was emanating from all around. Then the lights started flickering on and off all around them. They huddled together, absolutely petrified. Shannon just didn't know what was going on. She didn't know what to do. She'd never experienced anything like this before. Then, as quickly as the banging had started, it fell silent and the lights stopped flickering. But Shannon got the impression that the entity wasn't finished with them yet, and she was absolutely right. The eerie silence was interrupted by the sound of that music box on the mantel when it started playing on its own. This was followed by a deep, guttural growling sound coming from the dark void. Both Shannon and Jamie were frozen with fear, just absolutely terrified. Shannon clutched Jamie tightly in her arms. There wasn't much more she could do than that. How do you protect yourself from something you can't even see? After this experience, Shannon would say, this wasn't the same spirit as the elderly woman. This was different. Things started getting really rough. As I walked through the house, I could feel that the energy was different. It wasn't the same. I knew that the old lady was still there, but I knew something else was watching me. Shannon could never have predicted what was about to happen next. One afternoon, as Shannon stood at the kitchen window sharpening a kitchen knife reflecting on the New Year incident, she looked up and out of the kitchen window, and she saw the ghostly apparition of a long-haired man standing outside, partially obscured by a tree. Shannon couldn't believe her eyes. In her state of disbelief, she managed to cut her finger with the knife. She gasped from the pain and looked down for just a second to inspect the wound. When she looked back up shortly after, the man was gone, nowhere to be seen. While she was tending to her wound and applying a dressing, Shannon heard Jamie laughing and playing in the hallway. She entered the hallway to find Jamie laughing, spinning around in circles as if playing with someone. Shannon asks Jamie, "What are you doing?" To which Jamie responds, "We're playing." That's creepy. As Shannon could clearly see that Jamie was on his own. I mean, she knew he was on his own, there was nobody else in the house, but she could clearly see that he was completely on his own. And yet, here he is saying, "We're playing?" Who the hell is we, Jamie? But as Jamie ran upstairs towards his bedroom, Shannon noticed something even more disturbing. Wet, bare footprints on the floor in the hallway leading into the dining room. Slowly and apprehensively, Shannon approached the dining room, genuinely terrified of what might be lurking around the corner. When she first peeked around the corner, the first thing she noticed was the rocking chair, which just happened to be eerily rocking back and forth on its own, because that's completely normal, isn't it? Now, if that wasn't nightmare fuel enough, what she saw next might very well be. Standing just a few feet from the rocking chair stood a young girl, dripping wet from head to toe. Her hair was drenched, her clothes were soaking, and her skin was a pale blue. And let's just say she didn't look very much alive. But then, in an instant before Shannon's very eyes, the girl simply disappeared into thin air. Shannon said there was this little girl standing right there, just staring at me, straight face, just glaring at me. She looked drowned, and then she was gone. I was kind of in shock that my son was interacting with this spirit. It was alarming. And yet I can definitely understand why Shannon was so disturbed by this experience. It's one thing seeing an entity. It's another thing entirely for the entity to be interacting with your child. One afternoon shortly after, Shannon was doing some laundry upstairs, folding the clothes and putting them away in the cupboards. She walked into Jamie's bedroom to put some clothes away, and what she saw in Jamie's bedroom scared the absolute shit out of her. Sitting on Jamie's bed was a man. He was facing the window with his back to Shannon, so she couldn't see his face. But as he turned to face her, she instantly recognised him as the same man she'd seen standing outside by the tree. Shocked and terrified, Shannon mustered enough courage to ask the man, "Who are you?" The man took a second before responding. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt anyone. Tell my sister she can have my guitar." The entity then appeared to pull the revolver and shoot himself in the head, almost as a reactment of his own suicide. So, this is one of the first examples of the episode straying far away from the true story as told by Shannon herself. In the podcast, she said that there never was an entity who shot himself, and this is the part that upset Shannon the most about the episode because she was very clear with the producers about what really happened. This is what Shannon said really happened.
And it was his brother, and it did not happen there. He did not shoot himself. So when I watched, I was supposed to do the watch party when the show aired that day on October 6th or 8th, whatever it was, at their house. Mm-hmm. And luckily I woke up and watched it, and I was horrified because I respect my friends. I don't. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just because it didn't happen there, he didn't shoot himself. It was like out, 1 or 2 hours. It was far away. And it happened completely differently. And for them to show that, when I saw it, I just told myself, like, I'm sorry, we don't need to watch this tonight. And I explained to him, and I was like, I felt so bad, like it was my fault, but I signed contracts. So it didn't happen that way. It did not. Yes, I seen a man, which I'm pretty sure was him. Like I tried to talk, sitting on the edge of my son's bed. The bed wasn't set the right way. He was looking to his left at the window because the bed was along the wall, and he had his hands on his knees. He looked panicked, but he didn't pick up a gun and shoot himself. You know what I mean? That was to explain that was hard on me to my friends.
Right.
Because that was it was like the year anniversary of it happening too, when they was a year or a couple years. I don't remember, but it was an anniversary of it happening.
Shannon was well aware that there was more than one spirit in the house, and she just couldn't help but wonder why the hell this was happening to her. She had this nagging instinct telling her to just start doing some research on the house. She really needed to understand what's going on and what she was dealing with. So, Shannon did some digging around online and found the obituary for a man named Bill Remini, who was 29 years old. He was a gifted guitar player and was survived by his only sister, Denise. She also did some research about drownings at the lake next to the property. Almost instantly, it popped up with an article about a little girl who had drowned at the lake a few years prior to Shannon moving in. It was a memorial video, and in that video, Shannon said it was that child to a T. The same appearance, the same size, there was absolutely no denying it. It was her. She said that the spirits and the energy in that house wanted her to know that they were there. It really felt from this moment onwards, it was open season in the house. Here in the episode, Shannon takes the crew around the house to talk about her experiences. She describes an encounter where she walked through the front door and was confronted by a man with a grey, skeletal face. She described the sensation of squeezing on her heart. As she's talking to the crew, the lights in the hallway start to flicker. This is actually happening while they're filming, which was pretty cool. Shannon said she was in shock when she found out how many spirits were in that home. She got talking to one of her friends who is a psychic medium, who said that when a suicide occurs, it can trap other spirits in that place. The spirit of the man needed closure, and once that happened, he could go. Once he was gone, anything negative attached to the house would go with him, theoretically speaking. That friend, the psychic medium, well, let's just say we'll be seeing a bit more of her later. So, in the episode, Shannon decided to track down the man's sister and take the guitar to her, which was gratefully received. The man needed his family to know that he was sorry and asked that they forgive him. After this, the man's spirit was gone. Now, I'm not 100% sure how that specific detail tied into the real story, but that's what happened in the episode. So, Shannon was under the impression that once his spirit was gone, the other spirits would leave too. Well, if that was the case, I'd end the episode here. But Shannon was wrong. Very wrong. One night, when Shannon was putting Jamie to bed, he said, "Mama, there's something in here." Believing that the house had now been cleansed, Shannon responded, "Don't worry, honey, there's no monsters in this house." Shannon kissed Jamie on the cheek, said goodnight, and went to her own room to lie down on the bed and get stuck into a good book. As Shannon was about to fall asleep, she heard what sounded like a low, rumbling sound, and it was coming from Jamie's bedroom. There is a lamp in Jamie's room which projects moving light patterns on the wall, but these light patterns somehow appeared to be acting quite strangely. Shannon walked into Jamie's room to find him wide awake, mesmerised by the lights. She turns to see a dark entity standing in the corner of Jamie's bedroom. Shannon takes Jamie and runs to her bedroom and shuts the door. Knocking sounds all around. The door starts to rattle and bang. So, this is another part of the episode that Shannon contests as not being entirely true. She never actually saw the entity inside the house. She saw it outside in the outhouse. And while the show says she described it as a demon, Shannon said she never called it a demon at all, more of an elemental. We'll discuss that encounter a bit more later on. Shannon did say, however, that the feeling in Jamie's room was intense. There was something in there and it was wanting to hurt her son. Reflecting on this encounter at the time, Madison said to her mum, "That's creepy, but are you sure you weren't dreaming or something?" She admits that at one point she genuinely did think that her mum was going crazy. Well, Madison, you'll find out for yourself soon enough. Mark my word. The activity in the house was starting to increase dramatically. Shannon recalled how she had no way of leaving that house. Rent there was really cheap and there was problems with her rental history. So, all in all, unless she happened to buy a lucky lotto ticket, she was trapped. She was struggling to sleep and it was starting to affect her relationship with her friends and colleagues. She'd always described herself as a social butterfly, but was now becoming a recluse. And to be honest, if you see the difference in Shannon's demeanour during the show, and then a few years later after she left the house when she's talking on that podcast, honestly, it's chalk and cheese. She's like a completely different person. At this point, Shannon took Jamie to her mother's house and called in the help of her friend, that psychic medium I mentioned earlier. So another minor discrepancy between the show and the true story. In the show, the medium is depicted as a woman of Asian heritage named Megan, but in reality, she was a red-haired woman from Mississippi named Marsha. There you go, minor details. Shannon and Megan, or Marsha, produced a concoction of red brick dust mixed with cinnamon, thyme, and crushed eggshells. And that night, they conducted a seance to call out the entity. Initially, Shannon thought that the seance had cleansed the house of the entity. But, once again, Shannon was wrong. As Shannon and Megan, or Marsha, I'm just going to call her Marsha because, well, that's her name. So they sat at the living room table that night drinking a few vodka waters, which, by the way, sounds absolutely fucking disgusting. Is that literally just diluted vodka? The only thing on this planet that could possibly taste worse than vodka is watered down vodka. Seriously, that's fucking gross. Anyway, they were drinking and smoking, although Shannon wasn't usually a smoker. Then, Shannon started to display some quite concerning behaviour. She started to laugh maniacally, then flicked a lit cigarette at Marsha. Now, speaking after the fact, Shannon had absolutely no recollection of this incident. In the show, Megan leaves the house and tells Shannon she can't help her, but in reality, Marsha stayed the night and slept on the sofa right by the front door. There's a scene here in the episode where Shannon is sitting at the living room table and books start flying off the table and then a kitchen knife slides off the side. But I don't think this really happened. Well, if it did, then she didn't mention it in the podcast. So, it seemed that the portal had in fact been closed. Unfortunately for Shannon, the entity was still trapped on her side of the portal. And it was making life hell. Attacks had become physical. During an interview on the show, so this is actually happening on the show again, Shannon's phone starts ringing, although she swears she turned the volume off completely. So she gets up and turns the volume down to silent, and it starts ringing again, immediately. Coincidence? Maybe. Madison and her boyfriend Ed came to stay with Shannon for a while, as their lease had ended and they'd both been laid off from their jobs. Madison wasn't concerned about the haunting, she was excited to be staying with her mom. The house started to affect Ed almost immediately. Like his behaviour started to change instantly. The first night they were in the house, Shannon was awoken by strange sounds coming from downstairs, so she went down to investigate. She found Ed sitting at the table, acting bizarrely, like he was kind of talking to himself in a strange language and like scratching at the table. This entity acts quick. It usually takes weeks or even months for possession to take place, but this is happening pretty much immediately. Even Madison said she'd never seen him acting this way, and things were about to get much worse. In the show, Shannon is attacked and levitated from her bed by an unseen presence, and Madison is dragged out of the room by her feet. But in reality, Shannon said she was pushed from a chair, like forced backwards and pinned against the wall, and Madison, she was pushed down the hallway. I do kind of understand why they changed it. I mean, not that being pushed out of a chair and pinned against the wall, or being launched down a hallway aren't scary enough. But I suppose to be acted out on screen, it was probably easier and more effective to do it the way they did it. Anyway, Madison admitted at this point that she had gone from questioning her own mother's sanity to being absolutely terrified of that house. Madison begged her mum to leave, but Shannon had no way of leaving. As already discussed, she simply couldn't afford to leave. However, Madison and Ed did leave Shannon at the house, and honestly, personally, I just couldn't have left my own mother in that situation. How could you sleep at night knowing that your own mother is in that house alone? I couldn't. Well, Shannon was determined to fight back. She began screaming at the entity, demanding for it to show itself. And what do we say on this channel? Never challenge an entity. Ever. The entity responded to Shannon's outburst by banging on the walls and doors all around her. This soon brought the fear back to Shannon. Those screams of fury were soon replaced by whimpers of fear. Now in the show, the entity then shows itself to Shannon in the downstairs hallway, but in reality, as we've already discussed, she never actually saw the entity in the house. Instead, she saw it outside. Now, I would try to describe what Shannon saw, but it's probably best that I let her describe the encounter for herself.
Okay, we went into the back when someone came to my house from Houston because they were like, something is going like really bad. I'm like, yeah. She came up and I never went in that backyard ever. And so we walked to there was like an old chapel almost, this workshop in the backyard, a little steeple and stuff. And before I moved in, there was like a black tape cross on the front. I wonder why, but I never went back there, but I wanted to show her. So we walked back there. As soon as we opened the door, she's standing to my right, and it's a big wooden door, and I'm swinging it open. A little bit of light comes in, and we see a head about this big, like black velvety with a muscular body, like of a man body, with like cat ears. And he was like, I don't know, it's hard to say, perched like this, just looking at us. And it was like, we lost it. Like when we looked at each other, because we know what we see. Nobody can ever try to say it was anything else. And we like freaked out, shut the door. And it took us about, and of course with what we do, we're going in. So we went to the carport because I left all my stuff in the carport because like I said, I didn't go back there. Mm-hmm. So we got a big shop broom handle and I can't remember what else it was, a rake or something. And then we were going to go in and like see what was going on, because when you see something like that, you got to figure it out. Like we know what we seen. We both saw it and we were shaking like leaves. Mm-hmm. So we get back there. We got the courage up to open it up. And the guy was subleasing from, he had like a mattress standing up in there and a couple things. So it had like an old like switch to turn on, like almost like a power box to turn on the electricity. But like we got scared away, scared because I hit the mattress on accident and she jumped. But anyways, we freaked out. We finally got the guts to go in again, and then there's nothing there. There's nothing in there. And so we're like, dude, no, we know what we've seen. So we step out after like clearing the place, and we look, as far as scanning, and like there was nothing there. There was no way for something to jump out or get away. No windows open, and we were sitting there talking like, and then all of a sudden this like house cat this big comes running out of there and jumps off into the tree, like over the fence into the tree line and disappears. And it was not a cat. It was not a cat. And that was one of the scariest things I've ever seen in my life. I was out of there after that. I was done. I'm like, no.
Wow.
And but I never said demon. I never said it was a demon.
Right.
I think it's more elemental. I don't know. I don't know. But it was not like anything I want to ever see again. But it was funny. I was doing a residential. And at the time, my tech guy, he goes, Shannon, you got to hear this. I was talking to, the homeowner's father, and he used to live in that same little tiny neighborhood that couldn't have been more than like 50, 60 houses. And he was like, this was right there by the water. And he was, without knowing what happened to me and my story, was describing and being in that neighborhood as a kid and seeing exactly the same thing. So that was really cool. Like someone else was able to validate and describe exactly to a T that what I was,
So there you have it. And if that's true, then yeah, that would have been absolutely terrifying. To me, it does sound a little bit far-fetched, but then if I described my own personal experiences to people, they'd probably say the same thing, so who am I to judge? Eventually, after 22 months of suffering the effects of the haunting at 555 Sydenham Road, Shannon admitted defeat and went to the only place she could. She took Jamie and moved in with her mother. Shannon would describe the experience of featuring on the show as one of those things that seems like a great idea at the time, but then you regret doing after. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that she really, truly feels that way. The title of the show was A Ghost Ruined My Life. Maybe a more suitable title would have been A Ghost Changed My Life, probably for the better. But I don't suppose that would have pulled in half as many viewers. Following the experience, Shannon pursued a career in paranormal investigations, and I'm not entirely convinced that she would have seen the same level of success in her new career had she not appeared on the show. Now, the show made out that Shannon toured the country helping people with their own hauntings, which I suppose is kind of true. She helps people to find out what's going on at their property and how to deal with the situation. But she never says that she can make a haunting stop or make an entity leave a property. Shannon now hosts investigations around the country and owns her own company. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave any thoughts in the comments section. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul. One of the most memorable encounters Ryan ever had happened while he was engaged. His fiancée's family owned an old Texas house built in the 1860s. Only 3 families had ever lived in it, and the most recent owner was an older woman who they had nicknamed Edith, the Kitchen Ghost. Okay, so we know where this story's going. Nobody knew much about the families before Edith. The first time Ryan stepped into the house, he was overwhelmed by a rush of sensations. Goosebumps shot up his arms. He smelled fresh baked goods, and a cold chill ran down his spine. But more troubling was the sudden wave of pain, heat dizziness, and the sharp taste of ash in his mouth. His fiancée's mother noticed his face turn pale as Ryan stared through the living room, past the dining room, and into the kitchen doorway. He saw what looked like a hand resting on the frame, and then, in a blink, it vanished. At that very moment, every cabinet in the kitchen swung open. The family barely even reacted. Apparently, this was normal. I can categorically state that this is not normal, and if you ever experience anything like this in your own home, call the Ghostbusters. About a year later, when his fiancée's family left to work out of state, Ryan moved into the house with her. Big mistake, Ryan. From the moment he arrived, the place was restless. The house creaked and groaned whenever he was alone. The smell of baked goods would drift through the rooms, only to be replaced by the acrid scent of burning and the taste of ash. He didn't understand the source of the burning smell until one night when he was alone. He heard what sounded like small footsteps in the attic above him. Oh, that's creepy shit. Ryan, get out. Don't stay there. Just tell your fiancé you can either stay or come with me, but I am leaving. The attic access was in a hall closet right across from the bedroom he shared with his fiancée. At first, he assumed it was just animals up there, but before long, the noises became more and more human sounding. Around 3 a.m, he heard a child's giggle coming from inside the closet. Now, children's giggles are 100% where I draw the line. Probably wouldn't even pack my bags. I'm leaving in whatever I am wearing. Ryan unlocked the 3 latches on the door and opened it. 3 latches? Yeah, that's a red flag. Inside were only blankets, fans, school bags, and the steep staircase leading into the attic. Don't go into the attic, Ryan. Don't do it. There's nothing good up in the attic, I can tell you now. Curious, he moved everything aside and climbed up. Oh, for fuck's sake, Ryan. The moment he touched the stairs, the smell of burning intensified. The taste of ash coated his mouth, and he could feel his whole body growing hotter with every step. So this is where things get really creepy. At the top, he found an extra bedroom and bathroom completely charred. The walls, the furniture, and belongings were all black. Children's toys, half melted, sat scorched on a bed. The attic had clearly been destroyed by an intense fire decades earlier. As he explored, breathing became more and more difficult. When he turned to leave, a small, white, almost featureless face stared at him from the stairwell. He blinked, and the figure vanished. He rushed towards the stairs, only to hear them giggles and the tiny sound of footsteps behind him. Something collided with the door just as he slammed it shut. Slowly, the burning smell faded. The taste of ash disappeared, replaced by sweetness. Fresh cookie scent drifted through the hallway. When he finally walked into the kitchen for a drink, he turned from the fridge to find, once again, every cabinet was open. The dishes rattled inside them, then fell silent as the stovetop burners clicked on by themselves. Backing out of the kitchen, he turned towards the living room, and that's where he saw an old woman sitting calmly on the sofa, smiling at him before fading away. When Ryan explained everything to his fiancée's family, they simply told him, "Ryan, you should never have gone into the attic in the first place." After they left again to work out of state, Ryan returned and attempted to cleanse the house of whatever negative presence lingered. But the darker side of the haunting still remained. Bonnie was around 9 or 10 years old when her family moved to a neighbourhood in West Virginia just across a massive bridge. They were moving in with some close family friends and a few of their relatives. The house itself was fairly large, 4 bedrooms including an office, a basement, 2 bathrooms and an attic that doubled as a walk-in closet. Yeah, you'd need a pretty large house with that many people. So, to reach the room that Bonnie and her mother shared, you had to walk through the upstairs bathroom and then through the walk-in closet. And that room also connected to yet another bedroom through a second door. When they arrived, they were told that the previous owners had practiced some kind of voodoo, though Bonnie never knew exactly what that meant. What Bonnie did know, however, was that the place was full of dolls, baby dolls, doll heads, and even Barbies hanging. Okay, yeah, that is creepy. Outside the room that she and her mother stayed in, 4 pencils were taped to the wall. Each pencil had a yarn head and a name written on it. What the fuck is this? Some kind of... What's that film? Hereditary. This is definitely some kind of hereditary shit. No one remembered the exact names, but Bonnie and her mother were warned by the family not to remove the pencils. But something just felt wrong, and they took them down anyway. Now, The bedroom door almost never stayed shut, so they used a book to wedge under the door so it stayed cracked instead of swinging wide open. One night, most of the adults went out to a local bar, leaving only 2 adults, Bonnie and another small child. Bonnie stayed in her room watching her iPad. She accidentally turned it off and didn't know the password, so she tried turning on the TV. Nothing. So she was left alone in silence and decided to read her favourite book. She remembered how unnaturally quiet the house felt, like it was too quiet. After about 10 minutes of sitting there in silence, her bedroom door suddenly flew open with force, sending the book and all its pages scattering all over the floor. Bonnie broke down crying instantly. It terrified her so deeply that she still thinks about it to this day. Later, she was told the toddler might have used the bathroom and pushed the door open. But the speed and force didn't match. Bonnie knew this was complete bullshit anyway. She never saw the kid. And there were other experiences after that. Toys would move from where she'd left them, and she refused to shower with the frosted glass doors closed because she could often see the outline of a figure standing outside them, and then it would disappear when she poked her head around the door. Her family moved out only a few months later, not because of the haunting, but because the relationship between the families became untenable. Still, that house left a mark on her childhood that she'll never forget. Andy never considered himself religious. He didn't believe in angels, demons, God, or the devil, but he did believe that dark entities existed. What they were, however, he couldn't say. So, when he was around 5 or 6 years old, his family moved into their first home. A beautiful, decent-sized house in a suburban neighbourhood in Pennsylvania. Andy was the oldest of 4 siblings, and by the time he was 8 or 9, the strange experiences began to form into vivid memories. He and his younger sister would both see glowing red eyes staring from the shadows of their shared closet. Obviously terrified, they would run screaming to their parents about rats with red eyes. Their parents dismissed it as childish imagination, nothing more than the usual monsters under the bed phase. Why don't parents ever believe their children? If my kids were telling me they were seeing spooky shit in their bedroom, I'd at least go and investigate with them to show them that there's nothing there. Anyway, not long after this, both of the children began hearing their names being called by unfamiliar voices coming from the basement. Okay, so if one kid was hearing the voices, maybe, just maybe, you could suggest that they were hearing things. But when both kids are hearing the voices, nah, that's some creepy shit. They slept on the upper level of the 2-story house, with the half-finished basement below. Admittedly, their parents were concerned, but could still offer no real explanation. Well, eventually, their mother began experiencing similar things. Yeah, you're gonna believe them now. As a devout Christian, she confided in the family's pastor, who suggested cleansing the house. They prayed and drew crosses with olive oil on the walls. Instead of helping, this only seemed to provoke the activity. I've heard of putting crosses up around the house, but I've never heard of drawing crosses in olive oil. If you've ever heard of that, let me know in the comments. So, the red eyes returned, and the voices continued. Shadowy figures appeared at the edges of the children's vision, and at night seemed to move across their rooms. Andy and his sister would scream and hide under the covers until their parents came running, only to find nothing there. Okay, well at least their parents were running in to check on them, unlike some parents who just tell their kids to shut up. Objects began falling, moving or shaking on their own. Lights flicked on and off, and doors opened and slammed shut on their own. Chairs scraped along the floor with nobody anywhere near them. It was literally the full catalogue of ghostly activity, the kind of shit you'd expect from a TV show. Only this was unfolding in real life. Their mother tried her best to comfort them, believing that something truly was happening. Although their father remained slightly more sceptical. Haha, well, that was until one night when everything changed. Andy came downstairs crying about the monster sitting on the basement steps. His father tried to reassure him that there was nothing there and he was just imagining things. As he spoke, the basement door suddenly slammed shut and Andy's dad felt a force shove him down the stairs. Traumatised, he climbed back to his feet and the two of them left the basement and locked the door behind them. That evening, they prayed together as a family. The activity continued on and off for years. Multiple attempts to cleanse the house, even with the help from their pastor, made no lasting difference. Cold spots formed and the disturbances intensified. Around age 12, while home alone in the basement where the computer sat, Andy heard a violent crash. Every shelf in the room had been forcefully knocked down. He ran outside and waited until his parents came home, terrified to re-enter. Yep, I know exactly how that feels, Andy. I remember doing exactly the same thing once when I was a kid. Their dogs barked at unseen things. Shadows moved along the walls, and disembodied voices whispered in the darkness. The whole family experienced the disturbances, but Andy and his sister seemed to bear the brunt of it. As he got older, Andy began reading Bible verses aloud to fend off what he called the demon. It never truly worked, but it made him feel slightly less helpless. One night remains burned into his memory. A tall, shadowy figure standing across the room near his sister's bed, visible only by the dim glow of the TV. It seemed to notice him awaken. When it looked directly at him, he dove under his covers and froze. Hiding under his blanket, he could hear it breathing and feel its presence looming over him until he eventually passed out from fear. When Andy was 14, his grandparents, who were caring for his cousins, both fell ill, and unfortunately, shortly after this, his grandmother passed away. His grandfather and the cousins moved into the house with them. Before long, they too noticed the strange things. The family avoided the basement and the upstairs hallway as much as possible. Some nights, all of them would huddle together in a single room, listening to footsteps, movements, and unexplained noises echo throughout the house. Another pastoral visit brought temporary relief, but Andy believed the constant family stress and dysfunction kept whatever was there stirred up. Things only got worse as time went on. His parents eventually divorced and his mother fell into, let's just say, bad habits. Andy and his siblings later moved in with their father to a townhouse. Andy carries the trauma to this day. He still dislikes the dark, avoids attics and unfinished basements, and is certain something malevolent lived in that house. He rarely talks about what happened, except with his sister, who remembers the same things. Sharing the story now is his way of finally letting the memories breathe. Rebecca was about 9 years old and her younger sister was 6. Their parents were downstairs watching TV while the two girls headed upstairs to get ready for bed. It was dark, both outside and inside the house, and the only light switch for the stairway and upper hallway was on the first floor. Rebecca walked ahead and had just stepped into the upstairs hallway. Her sister was still a few steps behind her on the staircase. Rebecca reached for the light switch, and just 2 seconds before she turned it on, both girls saw it. The moment the light came on, the thing vanished. Rebecca's sister later said she saw it rush past her on the stairs. Rebecca saw it in the hallway, gliding upwards from the first floor, shooting up towards the second floor, straight towards the attic, which happened to be Rebecca's bedroom. It moved extremely fast and both girls were terrified. They ran back downstairs to tell their parents, but in typical fashion on this channel, their parents dismissed it as probably being their white cat. Except the cat had been downstairs the entire time. Whatever they saw didn't look like an animal anyway. It was white, low to the ground, and about the size of a basketball, round but stretched slightly because of the speed it was moving. It wasn't solid. It looked like white, semi-transparent smoke, yet bright enough to be clearly visible in the dark. There were no features, no face, no limbs, no hair, just a glowing, cloud-like shape that shot up the stairs faster than anything they'd ever seen. Neither Rebecca nor her sister ever saw anything like it again. Her sister believed the sighting happened around the time their grandfather passed away, though Rebecca wasn't so certain. But even now, she still wonders what that white shape really was. In 1984 to 1985, when Michael was about 14 or 15 years old, he lived in a small, older house in Spokane, Washington, with his mother and her partner. The upstairs was a converted attic divided into two narrow rooms. At the top of the stairs was a small space he used as a living room, and through a door, an identical space served as his bedroom. The ceiling sloped on both sides so steeply that only a 3-foot strip down the centre allowed him to stand upright. God, that made me claustrophobic. Their rescue dog wanted absolutely nothing to do with the attic stairs. Now, Michael assumed that the dog had simply had bad experiences with previous owners, but every time he tried coaxing him up the stairs, the dog would cower and whimper. Well, one day, determined to show him the room, Michael carried the dog up himself. The moment they reached the top, the dog panicked, whining, yelping, flattening himself to the floor. Then he lost control of his bowels, bolted back down the stairs and ran straight out of the house. Now, Michael brushed it off. He never felt anything threatening in the attic, so he wasn't overly worried. Well, about a week after moving in, he started waking up at around 3 a.m. almost every night. Why is it always 3 a.m? Is that the witching hour? I think that's the witching hour. Each time, he heard faint, classical music drifting through the attic. He assumed it was coming from neighbours or from downstairs and didn't think too much of it. And then came the night he left the door between his two attic rooms open. Again, at around 3 a.m, he woke to the music. But this time, there was a soft glow coming from his little living room area. When he stepped into the doorway, he saw his stereo turned on, turned to the local AM classical station. The volume was turned down to almost nothing. Well, that night he slept with the light on and the door shut. Well, the following morning, the stereo was back on the FM station he normally listened to, as if nothing had happened. But nearly every night after that, he continued waking up to the faint sound of classical music coming from the stereo. Well, since the attic never felt threatening, Michael decided to treat whatever was happening as harmless. As a gesture of goodwill, he began tuning the radio to the FM version of the classical station before bed, with the volume set low but higher than the ghost preferred. It felt like a small compromise. A couple of months later, they moved out, and at the time his mother told him the rent had gone up. Yet, years later, she admitted the real reason. She was terrified of the ghost in her bedroom. She said the curtains and doors would open and close all night long. Michael considers himself a skeptic and still tries to convince himself that he must have been sleepwalking or something. But even now, he isn't sure that explains everything that happened in that attic. And that's the end of the stories. Thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.
What would you do if the devil himself offered you the deal of a lifetime? That is what today's story is all about. And this story is called I Made a Deal with the Devil and Survived. I made a deal with the devil and kept my soul, but my deal might not be over like I thought. This is my story. I was once a dutiful soldier in a perpetual war that seemed never-ending. I was always at the front line, taking big risks and never getting injured, gaining the nickname the Iron Man. But one day everything changed. A peace treaty was struck. Unfortunately, it came at a great cost. New political powers rose from the treaty. Soon our country was being run by figureheads of the country we once fought against. It seems they won the war, but with pen and paper. There was so much corruption in many areas of this new government, and the people had no more fight left in them to try to stop it. There was no money for veterans, no jobs for the lower classes, and no social assistance as the politicians were pocketing the country's money. I, along with the majority of the country, was having trouble finding work. Our economy was suffering, and the job market was abysmal. I had no home and rarely had food. One day I came upon an apple tree that stood at a crossroads. Being hungry, I went up to the tree and plucked an apple down from it. I sat down to enjoy this brief moment, hoping the apple would give me some strength to carry on to the next day. As I took my first bite, I noticed a dark shadow traveling along the ground, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I slowly lifted my head to see an eccentric-looking man standing before me. The strange man wore a green jacket and leaned on a golden walking stick adorned with sapphires. The man looked quite dignified, but then I realized he had 2 goat hooves for feet. I jumped out of fright, dropping the apple as I stared down at the goat hooves. I went to grab my rifle from my back when the strange man started to speak. "I know what you are in need of," said the man. I stood there frozen for a moment, out of curiosity more than anything. I stopped to listen to what the strange man had to say. The man in the green jacket leaned forward on his walking stick and smirked as he continued to speak. "I will give you money and property, as much as you can squander away in your lifetime." I shook my head as I tried to make sense of the situation, stammering in response. Who? What? What are you talking about?" The man in the green jacket ignored my questions and continued. "However," he paused for a moment to add some sort of flair for the dramatic, waiting to see if I flinch at his words. "Before I give you everything your heart desires, I must know if you are fearless. I don't want to be giving away my money to a coward." The strange man questioning my bravery got my attention right quick, and I snapped back at him. "A soldier and fear? How can those two go together? I can handle any test of bravery." The man grinned wide and answered, "Very well, look behind you." I turned around and suddenly a large growling bear appeared, barreling towards me. I shouted for a moment out of surprise, confused where this bear came from. But quickly my training kicked in, and I grabbed my rifle and aimed. The man must have seen the smile on my face as I took aim and shot the bear in the snout. It fell down, motionless. The strange man grinned ear to ear and said, "Very good. You do not lack courage. But there is one more condition that you will have to fulfill." I was beginning to put together who this man was. The goat feet, the sudden appearance of a bear right on cue. And now he wants to make a deal? I realized I must be talking to a demon or the devil himself. So I quickly interrupted to make a counteroffer. Standing tall, I spoke with conviction. "As long as I can keep my soul in salvation, then I will consider your offer. Otherwise, I'll have nothing to do with it." The devil's face became emotionless as he leaned in closer, inspecting me up and down, taking a long whiff of me as if I was some sort of meal. He spun around and began to pace slowly, playfully whirling his walking stick around. The man came across as some kind of demonic circus ringleader with the way he moved and spoke. His face went from emotionless to uncanny as he smirked and began to speak. "A counteroffer. How intriguing." The devil grinned and stared me in the eyes as if trying to dig a hole into my soul. This clearly was a fun game for him, and he was playing with me like a cat plays with its prey. He continued, "How about this then? For the next 7 years, you are neither to wash yourself, nor comb your hair, nor cut your nails, nor pray. I will give you a jacket and a cloak, which you must wear. If you die during these 7 years, you are mine. If you stay alive, you are free and I will bestow all the riches upon you to last a lifetime. I pondered for a moment, thinking about how desperate I had been the past few months. And I thought about how many times I had faced death in the war and survived. I was the Iron Man, after all. I decided the odds would be in my favor. I nodded at him and said, "All right, you have a deal." The devil held out his hand. I leaned in, pausing for a moment, wondering if this was a mistake. But quickly he grasped my hand, and that was that. The deal was done. The devil took off his green jacket and gave it to me, saying, "Whenever you wear this jacket and reach into its pocket, you will find a handful of money." He then walked over to the dead bear and with a burning hand ripped off its pelt, transforming it into a cloak. He wrapped it around my shoulders and said, "This shall be your cloak and your bed as well. You are to sleep on it, and you are not allowed to lie in any other bed." The devil grabbed my jacket and put it on himself, as if it was some sort of symbol of the deal. He smiled at me with a malicious tone as he told me another condition. "One last thing. Your name for these next 7 years will be Bearskin. That is the name you'll go by, no exceptions." I furrowed my brow and began to walk up to him in protest. "Wait a minute, you keep adding things to this deal." But my protest was without merit as the devil smirked and turned and disappeared right before my eyes. I sighed and mumbled under my breath, "Bearskin? What a stupid name." I then shoved my hands into the pockets of the green jacket and found that the promise was really true. I felt piles of paper inside and pulled out a handful of them to see dozens of $100 bills. I gasped for a moment. Part of me thought this whole exchange was some kind of hunger-induced delusion, but no. I really did just enter a deal with the devil for my soul. "Oh, what did I do?" I cried out to myself. But it was too late. The deal was struck. I decided that I had to play the devil at his game. I would keep my soul pure and not let money taint it. I began to travel so I could do good in the world. I didn't buy any material things for myself, only basic food and shelter, and I gave money to others in need. I didn't want to get comfortable at any one location, so I stayed at hostels, shelters, or cheap motels. I figured if I did good deeds, my soul would stay clean. And if I kept on the move, I would have a better chance of not dying during these 7 years. The first 2 years, my appearance went from okay to somewhat acceptable. By year 3, I smelled like a rotting corpse and looked like some kind of cryptid bear person. I was covered in dirt, hair was overgrown and matted, and my nails were long and curling. I was a mess, and it was getting harder to be accepted around the general populace. Everyone who saw me ran away. But because I gave back to others, I was always able to get by and find some lodging and food. This was a 7-year war that I was determined to win. In the 4th year, I arrived at a growing town in the east. The only option for lodging was a motel that was being renovated. Half the rooms were still run down and unsafe. The owner would not let me rent a room, though. He told me it was because I would scare away patrons. So I reached into both pockets and pulled out piles of money for him, throwing it on the counter. The owner's eyes grew wide as he agreed to let me stay. But I had to stay in one of the dilapidated rooms. I also had to promise not to let myself be seen, saying he would charge me for any business lost if I scared away patrons. One evening, as I sat on the dingy bed, I began daydreaming about my future when I heard a loud sobbing in a nearby room. I had to stick with the plan. I had to help those in need, and I knocked on their door. An old man answered, his cheeks tear-stained, and the sound of his sobs still lingered. As he saw me, he jumped out of fear and was about to run away when I spoke. It seemed that a human voice coming from my tussle of hair and dirt made the old man curious, so he stopped to listen. I asked the old man, "What is wrong? Why all the tears?" The old man went on to explain his story. He recently lost all his money in a business deal. He even lost his house. The motel was the only place he could afford to keep a roof over the heads of his daughters and himself. And they barely had 1 meal a day to split between them all. The motel being upgraded meant the new owner wanted them out as they couldn't afford the upgraded rooms. The new owner threatened to call the police and have them arrested if they did not pay up or leave. I smiled at the old man and put my hand into the green jacket pocket. "If that is your only problem, I have money," I said as I handed him handfuls of bills. "Take it. Get back on your feet and help your family." The old man's eyes began to swell up as he softly cried tears of happiness. He smiled up at me and said, "Thank you for your generosity. Please come to dinner tonight with my family so I can repay you for your kindness. All I have to offer is my time and appreciation." I smiled and nodded at the old man, accepting his invitation. When dinner time approached, I knocked on his door. The old man answered and joyfully invited me inside. He went on to tell me how his daughters were so thankful for what I did for them. I followed the old man into the kitchenette. Just as he was about to introduce me to his daughters, one of them screamed out of fright and ran out of the room. For a moment, I forgot what I looked like. That scream reminded me again that people see me as a monster. I hung my head down and told the old man that I would just head back to my room. I started to turn around and leave when another one of his daughters called out to me. "Wait, please don't go. What you did for us, and we're strangers to you. Clearly you are not a monster, and we want to repay you for your kindness. Please have a seat. I want you to stay." She stood there smiling kindly. Her eyes held a pure sincerity in them. Her words and demeanor relaxed me, and I took a seat at the table with the old man and the two remaining daughters. Those kind-hearted daughters smiled as she passed me one of the dishes of food. "My name is Adriana," she said. I mumbled back, "My name is Bearskin." The other daughter at the table began to chuckle. She had been staring at me with a look of confusion. She scoffed and began her barrage of questions. "Who would name their child that? How do you even have money? Why don't you get yourself cleaned up? You look like an animal." The old man shot his daughter a look of disapproval as he shushed her. "Quiet, you." The old man looked back at me and said, "I'm sorry, she can be incredibly blunt and doesn't know how to be tactful with her words." His daughter folded her arms across her chest and began to pout. "Daddy, I'm just being an honest person. I don't see the point in lying." I looked over at her and nodded my head in response. Honesty can be very hard to come by. There are so many corrupt people in this world, it's nice to meet someone who has the ability to tell it like it is. She smiled at my response. We continued idle conversation as we finished the rest of the evening's meal. Their family won my heart that night, and I ended up spending the next year in that town. During that year, I helped them get situated into a home, get the father's business back, and pretty much became a part of the family. I had become especially close with Adriana. She was a very kind soul and was determined to repay my kindness with her company. As we spent more time together, I found myself starting to have romantic feelings for her. After 5 years of living with this deal, I decided to just be spontaneous. We were having a picnic at a nearby pond, enjoying the scenery, when I just blurted out, "Adriana, would you consider marrying me?" I know it was a huge leap to ask her to marry me when I looked like this, but after the way my life had gone over the last 5 years, I figured, why not take a shot at happiness? I had been dealing with rejection and disgust this whole time, so I could easily handle if she said no. Adriana sat up and moved her hands to grab mine. Even though they were in a disgusting state, she didn't seem to care. She smiled up at me and surprisingly responded with, "Yes, that would be lovely. There's so much bad in this world. I know you're a good man and you truly care about my family." I smiled and pulled an old ring off one of my fingers, snapping it in half as I tried to explain my one caveat. I still have to complete this journey I'm on. It is difficult for me to explain why, but I must leave for a bit to finish this. She looked up at me concerned. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. I shook my head and told her, "I have 2 more years left. If you are okay with waiting, I want you to keep half this ring and I'll keep the other half. When I get back, I'll get you a proper ring." She began to cry softly and I wrapped my arms around her. I told her, "I must go help more people. I have a situation hanging over my head and I don't want you or your family to get hurt. I promise I will tell you everything if I return. If I do not return after 2 years, then it is because I have died." She nodded, continuing to cry, and took the half piece of ring. I traveled the country for the next 2 years, doing good wherever I could. Finally, the last day of my 7 years came around. So at dawn, I went back to the apple tree at the crossroads and waited for the devil to show up. Fairly quickly, the wind began to howl and the shadow fell across the road again. I looked up to see the devil scowling at me angrily. He threw my old jacket at me and demanded the return of his green jacket. I stood tall, proud of surviving the last 7 years and doing good all along the way. I held up a finger to the devil as I made my demands. Now hold on, we haven't finalized our deal yet. You added more to the deal without giving me a chance to counter last time. So my final demand is, you have to clean me up. Take the last 7 years of filth and growth and make me look as I was. The devil scowled and raised his hand up, snapping his fingers, and suddenly I was back to looking like myself again. My skin was clean, hair and nails trimmed, and clothing was fresh. I looked even better than I had before. Now, you owe me my riches, I announced to the devil. The devil grit his teeth and reluctantly snapped his fingers as he said, "There. Now your jacket will always provide you with the same wealth as my green jacket did before." He then snatched up his green jacket and in an instant disappeared. Seeing the demon gone, I smiled and let out a breath of relief. Finally, my life is my own again, I said to myself as I walked away from the crossroads for the last time. I quickly traveled back to the town where Adriana was, hoping with all hope that she would still be there waiting for me. When I knocked on the door, I looked so different from before that no one recognized me. The old man thought I was a businessman and invited me inside. I sat down with the father and the 3 daughters. The 2 daughters fawned over me. They started pouring me wine while serving me fine foods to eat and doing everything that they could to vie for my attention. Adriana, however, would not raise her eyes to look at me and did not speak a word. She was dressed all in black, and that's when I realized she thought I was dead. The father began conversation, assuming I was there to discuss a business opportunity. But I interrupted him and told him, "Oh no, I'm here to get my bride so we can get married." When the 2 other sisters heard this, they jumped up and ran into the bedrooms to put on some fancy dresses. Apparently, each of them thought I was here to arrange a marriage and that they may be chosen as a bride. Their father went to his study to grab some paperwork he had regarding his daughter's dowries. As soon as I was alone with Adriana, I brought up my half of the ring and dropped it into a glass of wine, which I handed across the table to her. She took the wine and began to sip on it, suddenly seeing the half ring in her glass. Her face changed and she began to smile. She took her half, which she wore on a ribbon around her neck, put them together, and saw that the 2 pieces matched perfectly. I looked adoringly at her and said, "It's nice to meet you, Adriana. My name is Jacob. The journey is finally over." She smiled wide and stood up, embracing me, and we kissed. In the meantime, the 2 sisters came back, beautifully dressed, their hair and makeup done just right. When they saw Adriana and I kissing, they began to fume and cry. The sister's eyes seemed to flash red, and she walked out of the room for a moment. But her walk seemed off, like a marionette being controlled by strings. I felt the air in the room shift. Something was wrong. I looked around the room trying to figure out what was going on. Suddenly, Adriana's sister came running back in, screaming with a knife in her hand. I couldn't stop her in time, and she began attacking Adriana with quick movements over and over. A scuffle ensued, and I pulled her off Adriana, throwing her against a wall, knocking her unconscious. But it was too late. I scooped up Adriana. She had lost so much blood. It was everywhere. So much damage in only a few seconds. I yelled at the other sister to call for help. She got scared and ran out of the house. The father came running into the room after hearing all the screaming. Upon seeing the bloody mess and his daughter laying there lifeless, he began to clutch at his chest as he too fell to the ground. I felt like I was in some weird fever dream surrounded by death. I ran to the phone to call for help. As I was speaking with emergency services, I heard Adriana's sister wake up and start screaming. What did I do? What did I do? I ran back into the room, tried to subdue her until police showed up, but she saw me, panicked, and ran out the front door. I ran after her but couldn't catch up. I watched as she ran into the road and straight into traffic, when suddenly a large truck appeared out of nowhere, slamming into her. I stood outside for a moment in complete shock of everything I just witnessed. Then suddenly, I felt a cool chill, the hair raising on the back of my neck, as I watched a shadow crawl along the ground. The familiar shadow, as I had seen 2 times before. I turned around to go back into the house, but there he was, leaning on his walking stick, grinning at me. The green jacket and goat feet mocking me. I became red with anger and I began to yell at him. "What did you do?" The devil leaned in close, growling out to me. "Can't you see? I now have 3 souls instead of just your 1. He then disappeared in the blink of an eye. I lost the love of my life that day and remained forever scarred. 3 people died and their souls damned, all because I made a selfish deal. I never forgot their faces. They haunted me. 10 years have passed, and yet I recognized her like it was yesterday. The sister who ran away. I saw her standing outside my apartment last night, and she was wearing a green jacket. That familiar jacket. I thought I escaped with just heartbreak, but it would seem there's no true escape from the devil. I'm not sure what kind of deal she made, and this is why I'm currently recording my story. I don't know what will come of me tomorrow. This might be my end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. What would you do if a loved one came back from the dead, but they weren't quite themselves anymore? Something was wrong. That is what today's story is all about. This story is called My Brother Died, but Then He Came Back and Everything Was Wrong. I wish I was still oblivious to the truth. Go back and live in ignorance. I didn't know all this stuff was real. Witchcraft, necromancy, magic. Why would anyone think that was real? I guess I should start from the beginning. With the people who brought this hell upon me. My parents. A few years before I was born, my father had a different family. He was married previously, before my mother. He used to tell me how wonderful his first wife was and how happy she made him. But all she ever wanted was a child, and they were struggling to conceive. After years of trying, one day his wife came home with a sapling of a juniper tree. She began to tell him about a woman who sold her an old Italian strega spell to help her. He never believed in such things, as most people don't, but he didn't protest. If it made her happy to try Hui magic, it wasn't hurting anyone. So he smiled and told her to do what she thinks is best. He never knew all the details of what the spell entailed. All he remembered was her planting the sapling in their backyard, and she would go out and prick her finger at it monthly, letting a drop of blood land in the soil under it. As she cared for the tree and helped it grow, one day it grew mature enough to bear fruit, which apparently she had to eat. My father always said he believed it was because the tree brought her happiness and she was finally not stressed constantly, and that's why they were able to finally become pregnant. She told him she had to eat the berries every day through the pregnancy as she was instructed by this old woman who sold her the spell. My father didn't really think much of it, he just agreed. Eventually the day came when my brother was born. This was both the happiest and saddest day of my father's life, he told me. Something went wrong during childbirth, and she died. On her deathbed, she begged my father to bury her with the tree. He told me she was rambling about it being very important. Normally, he wouldn't have listened to a drug-induced rambling like that, but it was her dying wish. Since it's technically not legal to just bury someone in your backyard, my father did what he could. Before she was cremated, he had locks of her hair and pieces of her nails trimmed off so he could bury them under the tree. He also spread her ashes along the base of the tree as well. Now he found himself to be a single father to a boy who needed a mother. It just so happened, however, in the hospital he met a nurse, my mother. She was there for him through the grieving process as a friend, but soon they started developing romantic feelings and eventually got married. I was born shortly after that. My father loved both his children very much, but my mother felt like he showed more love to my brother than me. Looking back on it, I don't think he was ever favoring him over me, but my mother got in my head about it. Anytime he would ask my brother to join him to do something, my mother would point it out to me. She would say things like, "See? He prefers his first child. He still loves his first wife, and he still hasn't gotten over her for us." I don't know why, but I started to believe her. I guess it was just between me being young and impressionable and her constant barrage reminding me that I was less important than my brother. I think I became conditioned into believing whatever thing my mother spewed out at me at the time. My mother would be hostile to my brother. She often would give him trouble and pick on him when my father wasn't around. Some days would be worse than others, but the worst day of the year was always on his birthday. That was the day my father would spend hours talking to my brother about his birth mother. My father would look so happy when he spoke of his memories, and that made my mother very sad at first. Then the sadness would turn to anger. That carried on all through my life, until the day it happened. The worst day of my life. The biggest mistake I ever made. It was my brother's 18th birthday when it happened. My father surprised him with the news that he was going to pay for his college, his apartment, and he bought him a new car. I don't know what my parents' finances actually looked like. Looking back, I shouldn't have listened to my mother. I should have talked to my father. But my mother was quite good at manipulating me at this point. After the party, my mother pulled me aside and told me that there would be no money left for me after this. She convinced me that my father only cared about his son getting a good start in life. I got so mad when she told me this. But I was mad at my father and my brother. My mother then told me she had a plan. She was going to make sure that I had a future too. I agreed to help her without knowing the details. That was a mistake. The next day, my father was at work, and my mother was helping my brother pack his things for college. She called me over and told me to put the large totes out back by the tree. She looked me in the eyes and told me, "This is very important. I need you to stack all those totes on top of one another." She winked at me, and I did as she asked. When lunchtime came around, my mother made us all lunch and called me and my brother downstairs. "It's such a nice day out today. Let's eat outside," my mother exclaimed. She was looking so happy and not being so mean to my brother for once, so we agreed. My brother was enjoying this day, feeling like he had a mother who cared about him. These kind of days were rare, so we both would usually tend to just do whatever my mother wanted to keep her in a good mood. We sat outside and had a nice lunch, talking about the future, and just all around, it was so far a really good day. My mother wandered over to the tree as she inspected the totes. She called my brother over, and they looked like they were inspecting the boxes. My mother looked up at the tree and pointed to it as she reminded my brother of his mother who was buried under it. She told him he should kneel down at the tree and tell her goodbye. Tell her about how he's going off to college, and so that's what he did. My mother called me over quickly, and she pulled my arm to move me behind the boxes. She made a motion with her hands, telling me to push the totes down onto my brother. I didn't realize this was her plan. I just opened my mouth in shock and shook my head and whispered quietly, "No, I won't." My mother scowled at me and whispered back, "You will do as I say." She grabbed me by the arms and slammed me into the totes, causing them all to follow my brother. "There, was that so hard?" She smirked as she spoke to me. "Now go check to see if he's dead." I just stood there in total shock. My face lost all its color as I couldn't believe what just happened. My mother walked back into the house, swaying back and forth, and she looked quite happy with herself. Everything was moving in like a slow motion. I had no idea that this was the plan. I didn't want to kill anybody. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I began to hyperventilate. Then I thought, well, maybe he isn't dead. I could still call for help. I began to pull the totes off of him and reached down to try to feel for a pulse. I didn't know what I was doing, but I saw blood pooling all over the ground around his head. I began to cry and I ran into the house looking for my phone. Suddenly, my mother appeared holding both my phone and my brother's phone in her hand. "Looking for these?" She smiled as she spoke. She sounded like a maniac. I know she had problems, but not until now did I ever realize just how twisted her mind was. Everything came rushing at me like a light switch. All my memories came flooding, all the time she convinced me I wasn't good enough and that my father didn't love me as much. It was like watching her be so happy about killing another human being just gave me a sudden moment of clarity. "You're a monster!" I screamed at her. "Give me my phone, we might still be able to save him." I lunged at my mother and tried to grab my phone. She shoved me to the ground and scowled at me. "You're lucky to have me for a mother," she grunted back. "You clearly don't have it in you to take care of yourself, to do whatever it takes to get ahead in life." I began to cry and I looked up at her. "Why are you doing this? I didn't want this. I would rather be poor than kill somebody. Now give me my phone." She towered over me. Her face seemed contorted in an unhuman way. "You have no idea the things I have done to make sure we both had a good life. You're weak. I clearly have more work to do before letting you out into the world on your own." She scowled at me as she spoke. I jumped up and tried to tackle her. She was stronger than I realized. I wasn't making a dent in trying to fight back. "So weak. Tisk tisk." She shook her head back and forth. She chuckled, then threw my phone down. "Fine. Call the cops. But I'll just tell them the truth. You pushed those boxes onto your brother. You're jealous of him. Always have been. And I saw it all." I grabbed the phone and I looked up at her. She was always good at getting into my head. I sat there for a moment in shock. I asked her, "Would you really rather see me in jail?" She bent down, her eyes meeting mine as she spoke. "Yes. Look how weak you are. I can have another child, or maybe I'll just keep the money all to myself." "Go ahead, call them. It's your fingerprints all over all those totes. I haven't touched them at all today. I also saw you pulling them off of him." She pointed down at my knee. "You even have his blood on you." I looked down at my clothes and I realized I did kneel in his blood. All my thoughts were rushing through my head at the moment. I imagined myself being arrested and rotting in jail. I started to bawl my eyes out at the thought. I looked up at her and I mumbled, "Fine, I won't call. But I won't have any further part in this." She grunted at my response and grabbed my arm to pull me up. "Oh no, you will. And I need you to deal with the body, and you'll help me clean up, or I'll call the police on you." She pushed me to the door. "Come on. We need to put him in his car and load up his things in there with him." I was a puppet, lost in grief and shock. I began to just move, not even wanting to. I just seemed like my body took over on autopilot. I was crying the whole time. My mother would shove me every once in a while when the crying got too much for her. She was very careful not to touch anything and made me pack up his car until it came time to move his body. She had me pull his car up to the back gate and we dragged his body to the car. I then noticed that she was wearing gloves for this. She really was going to set me up, I thought to myself. She handed me my phone and told me to follow the route that she put in there and she'd follow behind in her car. I got in the car and did as she ordered. I kept looking at my brother's dead body sitting in the passenger seat. "I'm so sorry," I cried out. "I don't want to do this. She's making me do this." "Not like you can hear me anyway." I trailed off and began to cry. As I pulled up to the destination, I realized my mother's plan. The car made it over its last hill. The sun was beginning to set, the red and pink rays falling down onto the bridge in front of us. It was clear she was going to have me help her drive his car off the bridge. I pulled off to the side of the road and looked through the rearview mirror as she pulled up behind me. She got out of the car and instructed me what to do next. The main tote that hit his head, she had me stack it up behind him in the driver's seat as we moved him into it. This bridge had dirt paths to the side for walking trails. We were going to be driving his car into the water from the top of one of the paths. We emptied a tote of some of his things all over to make it look like everything fell out. She had me start the car, and she started throwing heavy items through the window and piled them around his feet until his dead foot pressed onto the pedal hard enough to start driving over the edge. I watched his car crashed off into the edge of the river under the bridge. My mother then threw his phone into the water and told me to get in her car and go home. When we got home, my mother began to clean up the backyard. She pointed to the tree. There was a pile of blood laying there. "Go grab a shovel and dig up the dirt and bury the blood," she barked orders at me as she went inside. I grabbed a shovel from the shed and did as she said. As I finished burying it, a final tear fell on the fresh dirt I packed on top of the area. Suddenly, I saw the tree go up in flames, but it wasn't on fire. The fire just burned just on the outside of the bark, like the tree was being encased with fire. Suddenly, I heard a caw as a big black raven flew out from the flames of the branches. I just saw it for a moment, but I swear its eyes were burning red. Maybe it was just a reflection. But what's happening? I'm trying to rationalize a bird with fire red eyes when this tree is literally up in flames in front of me. I reached out my hand, just completely confused as to what I was looking at. As I went to try to touch the flame, the bird flew off and the flames just vanished. And just as the flames vanished, my father returned home from work. My mother had set out dinner and was acting completely normal. None of what happened fazed her one bit. My father asked where my brother went, and I couldn't help it. I started to cry. My mother raised an eyebrow at me, giving me a look before she told my father the lie that she concocted. Oh, he was so excited. He left a day early for college. He said he would call later when he gets settled in. My father looked over at me crying and gave me a reassuring hug. It's all right, sweetheart. You'll see him on holiday breaks. You'll get used to him coming and going soon enough. He kissed me on the forehead, which just made me cry more. But still, my father said, would have liked to see him off. He nibbled at his food a bit, looking a bit upset when suddenly my mother spoke up. Why don't you head over to the campus tomorrow and visit him? Make sure he's all settled in, dear. My father smiled at her idea and nodded, his head agreeing that he would do just that. My mother looked over at me with a look in her eyes as she spoke. It gives us girls a bit of time to get together and have girl talk. I can help her calm down and get her head on straight again. There was something sinister in her voice as she spoke. Seems I was the only one who noticed, though. In the morning, my father packed up a bag and headed out to visit my brother. I watched as my mother waved goodbye to him and he drove off. She turned back around and came inside to find me. There, now you have a day to get over yourself and not blow this for both of us. Cry your little heart out, and by the end of tomorrow, this stops. You need to toughen up and get over yourself. I went up to my room and just laid in bed, grieving for my brother. Worried my father would be the one to find his car and body on the drive there. We didn't take the freeway, so he may not be the one to discover him, I told myself. I hate that she also may have put my father down that path as well. Why is she so cruel? Why have I never noticed how evil my own mother was? Eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up it was dark out. Great. Now I'm going to be up all night, I mumbled to myself as I got up and looked out the window at the tree. The memories of what happened flashed before me, and I began to feel the panic and sadness again. I just don't understand how she's so calm and okay with what happened, I whispered to myself. Suddenly I heard a crash downstairs. I walked towards my door to open and go check, but I found myself frozen in place. My heart started beating heavily. I felt the panic starting up again. I'm scared of her. I'm too scared to go to my own mother now. Before I knew it, I grabbed a chair and used it to prop it up against my doorknob to lock myself in my room. I went and sat at my windowsill looking out at the tree again. Hopefully she doesn't call out to me, I whispered to myself. I need to find a way to get away from her. I'd heard her moving around downstairs as I sat quietly. I didn't want her to know I was awake. Suddenly I saw that raven again. She was pecking at the dirt under the tree, a spot that I dug up to hide the blood. The raven didn't seem to notice me, but I did finally see that, yes, its eyes were red, slightly glowing. My heart began to beat again. Something about it scared me. I wanted to understand what was going on. I quietly slid the chair away from my door and tiptoed downstairs. I looked over at the kitchen, saw some movement in there, and I quickly grabbed my jacket and keys and snuck out the front door quietly. I took a breath as I closed the door ever so softly, praying that she didn't hear me. I tiptoed down the steps and peeked around the side of the house looking for the bird. But then I saw it. My blood turned cold, felt my stomach drop, and pure and utter terror ran through me. I saw him. I saw my brother, but he wasn't my brother. He was dead. Definitely dead. He was walking around. His water-soaked skin was gray and looked like it was beginning to peel off, leaving behind gaping holes of sludge, black flesh. His eyes were red like the bird's eyes, but looked so lifeless. What the hell is going on? I thought to myself. Then I saw what was in his hand. My mother. He was dragging her lifeless body. Her neck was crushed, her head was bent completely to the side. Looked like it was just dangling there. Her skin on her neck was still intact, but like a piece of rubber holding her head as it hung there. My brother dragged her from her arm with great ease over to the tree. He grabbed her head and yanked on it, letting loose the skin, and it just exploded blood everywhere on the tree. I slipped back around the corner, gagging and trying not to scream at the same time. I started searching my pockets for my keys when suddenly I saw a huge reflection of light hit the fence and heard the whooshing sound of a fire starting up. I peeked around the corner once more to see the tree lit up in fire again like it had been that one day. So I wasn't crazy. This actually did happen. I watched the trunk of the tree open up this time, and my brother shoved my mother's body inside of it. The tree looked like it was eating her. My fingers finally felt the cool metal of the keyring in my pocket as I quietly ran to the car. I got inside, locked the doors, and started it up, quickly taking off from the house. I looked back in the rearview mirror and I saw him. He was running in the road. He saw me leave. This can't be my brother, I kept telling myself. I grabbed my phone and opened the map to go back to the bridge. I have to check his car. I have to see if he's still in there. I sped off to the bridge, tried to get some answers. It was faster than last time. I was probably speeding and not realizing it. Surprised I didn't get pulled over. I slowly pulled up to the side of the road again. I looked around the car for any sort of weapons. All I found was a little knife we had in a glove box for emergencies. I grabbed it. Better than nothing, I thought. I made my way down to where the car crashed into the river. I saw one of his totes floating around, some clothes, random things. I pulled up my phone and turned on the flashlight, trying to look into the dark water. And there I saw the car. From the shore, I shone my light, trying to look in to see if his body was still in there. It was a bit too far away. I carefully began to balance myself on some big rocks that were in the water, shining the light down further into the car. I could finally see the driver's seat, and there it was. Nothing. His body was gone. I felt my stomach drop again. What the hell is going on? I asked out loud. I felt a panic attack coming in again, and I was trying to get off this rock before I fell in. when suddenly I heard the cawing of the raven. It flew right at me and I slipped and fell into the water, dropping my phone. I watched as the light from my phone illuminated what looked like my brother swimming up from the bottom of the lake. I screamed and began to panic, trying to pull myself out of the water, my foot slipping between two rocks and getting stuck. I kept pulling and pulling as I watched him slowly get closer to me. His rotten form sent a shock of adrenaline through me as his features became clearer. He looked horrible. He was a monster. Finally, my foot slipped out of my shoe, which was still embedded between the two rocks, but I didn't care. I just started to run. I ran back to the car and got inside. I locked the doors as I began to speed away. What am I going to do? I need a plan. I started rambling to myself. There has to be some way to stop this thing from chasing me. I thought about going back home and trying to destroy the tree. But it can't be burned, and I don't know how to chop a tree down, I mumbled to myself as I tried to run through the options of what to do. This is some magic thing, right? The tree, my father said his wife brought it from a witch or something? I was about to call out to my phone to Google breaking curses, but then I realized, right, my phone's in the water. This is a small city we're in. I don't know of any witches that live here. Screw it, I said as I spun the car around. I decided to try the local church. The church must have some kind of protection, right? If witches are real, then the church and all that crap is real too, right? It must be. I was talking to myself like I was a madwoman, trying to logic some kind of reason and solution out of the situation. I drove straight up to the church doors and I ran for my car to get inside, but they were locked. Of course, it's after dark. In this city, nothing's open late. I decided to try and see if anyone was there. I began pounding on the door and screaming for help. I kept looking behind me, watching for the bird or my brother to come walking up at any moment. I was hysterical at this point. I started screaming, "Help! Let me in, please!" I was crying and pounding my fists on the door when suddenly I heard a latch move. Someone was there unlocking the doors. "Oh, thank God," I called out. "I need asylum or something. There's something evil out here. I need help." I began to ramble, but no one opened the door. Paused for a moment, thinking something felt off, and I slowly reached down for the handle of the door. I pressed on the handle. It was unlocked now. I slowly opened the door and peeked my head inside. Suddenly, the raven came barreling at me and started to peck at my face. I screamed and ran back to the car, driving off. "There's only one other place I think I can go now," I started rambling to myself. I began to drive into the heart of the city, towards the police station. I wasn't too far away, maybe a couple blocks. I started to speed up, trying to get there quickly. I glanced into my back mirror and then I saw him. He was sitting in the back seat. When he realized that I saw him, he began to grin at me, his arms beginning to move out towards me. I panicked, slammed on the brakes, and grabbed the knife and stuck it in one of his arms. I didn't hear him react, though. No sound, nothing. I quickly jumped out of the car, and I began running the rest of the way. I began screaming at my brother. "Stop! I'm gonna turn myself in, I swear. I'm gonna go tell the truth. Please, let me set things right." I was just screaming it into the empty streets as I ran. I didn't see him following me, but that didn't mean that he wouldn't just pop right out of a dark corner and grab me. My heart was racing as my eyes darted back and forth, running as fast as I could, with only one shoe. Eventually, I did make it to the station. I began to bang on the glass, screaming to the overnight clerk. "I need to confess, let me in. It's trying to kill me, I need to confess, I killed him, I need to confess." I probably looked like a crazy person to this clerk. She radioed in for other officers to come to the front. She looked a bit frightened at me. They all came barreling out front and opened the door. Hands up, hands up. Do you have any weapons on you?" I lifted my hands up as they told me to do. No, I don't have anything," I said back to them. They slowly moved towards me, their tasers drawn, and began to pat me down. They looked suspicious at me, but placed me in cuffs and pulled me inside. They placed me in an interrogation room, flicked on the cameras, and told me my rights. "I waive the right to a lawyer," I quickly said. "I have to confess now, before this thing kills me." I began to ramble, and I told them the whole story. As I spoke, I felt a weight being taken off me. Felt like this must be what I was supposed to do to get my brother to stop chasing me. I think I was doing the right thing. After I was done talking, the officers went to go get me some water. They handed me a pen and a pad of paper and told me to write it all out, which is what I'm doing here right now. And as you read this paper, you'll notice a big line follows past the last letter. Like something distracted the writer. And then one more line is written. The bird. It's here. And that is the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.
For years, scratch that, centuries, the idea of spontaneous human combustion has instilled both interest and fear into the mind of onlookers, and how could you blame them? The what-if factor is strong with this one. The mere idea is baffling in its own right. I'm sure we've all enjoyed a stiff drink of whiskey. Man, does that burn. Or at least some awful heartburn. Following a binge of food that tastes so good but bears harsh consequences. Now times that by 1,000, and that might just scrape the surface of the horrible nightmare that is spontaneous human combustion. So what even is it exactly? Spontaneous human combustion is the alleged medical phenomenon that sees the human body self-destruct by internal fire. Downright terrifying and insane, am I right? The body is guilty of a variety of strangeness, but is this too far? The populace remains divided. Paranormal enthusiasts cling to the idea as a perfect example, as a baseline to other otherworldly fringe phenomenon that span far past our agreeable perception of normalcy, while scientists argue a simple explanation in the Wick effect to quell the hype, yet finding shortcomings in the explanation to completely debunk the obscenity. Let's take a deeper dive. With the idea of spontaneous human combustion still up for debate, let me present the evidence, put the case on trial, and you be the judge. Spontaneous human combustion, as defined by Nicholas Kluger and Vervi Kuljonen in the journal article Spontaneous Human Combustion in the Light of the 21st Century, found on the National Library of Medicine's website, refers to a situation when a human body is found with significant portions of the middle parts of the body reduced to ashes, much less damage to the head and extremities, and minimal damage to the direct surroundings of the body. Typically, no observable source of ignition is found in the vicinity of the victim, and a bad-smelling, oily substance is noted. Although it has been annotated constantly throughout history, pop culture has helped revive the medical oddity, with one specific author accredited with helping bring back spontaneous human combustion into the limelight. Charles Dickens. Yes, A Christmas Carol Charles Dickens is accredited as bringing the idea back into the minds of the public with his 1853 novel, Bleak House. Within its pages, Dickens uses this strange medical phenomena to take care of one of his characters, described as an old sleazy alcoholic. Alcoholism being a constant characteristic in victims of spontaneous human combustion, Mr. Crook reducing him to a mere heap of ashes upon the floor and a dark greasy coating on the walls and ceiling. Dickens' choice of death was met with much scrutiny by the public, who perceived the idea as pure lunacy. This is quite the reaction, considering the public, who now ridiculed him, gawked at his work 10 years prior, having no reason to fret at the tale of Ebenezer Scrooge being visited by not one, not two, not even three, but 4 ghostly visitors. Dickens defended his choice of death relentlessly, clinging to his apparent deep historical research, being able to cite dozens of famous cases, well verified by doctors' judgment of the times, leaving his naysayers with this final verdict. I shall not abandon the facts until there has been a considerable spontaneous combustion of the testimony of which human occurrences are usually received. Dickens does not stand alone in his pop culture references with his use of spontaneous human combustion. Others have found both traditional and other interesting ways to adopt the concept into their work, blending the lines of potential fact and fiction. Like Dickens, authors Herman Melville and Nikolai Gogol have used both spontaneous human combustion in a traditional sense in their respective works, Redburn, 1849, and Dead Souls, 1842. More modern adaptations have seen a shift in the strange mythical happenings lethal factor. Superhero Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four series, embraces the concept of spontaneous human combustion, putting a new twist upon the idea, using this unfortunate circumstance as a positive claim for a unique superpower. Returning to its traditional sense, author Joe Hill takes the phenomenon to a new extreme height, letting us know that if one case of spontaneous human combustion is terrifying, try a world infected by the idea. Within Hill's novel, The Fireman, spontaneous human combustion fills the void for an apocalyptic fate. Characters within the book are infected by a horrible plague virus called Dragon Scale, which reacts to a person's stress level. I know people who wouldn't even last moments, let alone days. When an infected person becomes too anxious and or overwhelmed, they erupt with a fire until they settle into an ashy death. Can an inescapable death become any more terrifying than this? Let's talk about some alleged cases. The case of Dr. Irving Bentley actually happened in my hometown. Over the past 300 years, there have been more than 200 reported cases of alleged spontaneous human combustion. If we look back even further to medieval literature, we find what is often claimed as the first account of a recorded case of spontaneous human combustion, Polonus Vorstus. Henceforth, since Vorstus, each case has shared the following characteristics as originally described in the book Medical Jurisprudence, 1821, that was revisited when cited by L.A. Perry in 1938 in the British Medical Journal. Victims are chronic alcoholics, usually elderly females. Their bodies had burned spontaneously, their hands and feet usually fell off, the fire caused little damage to the surrounding areas, the combustion of their bodies left a residue of greasy and fetid ashes as well as a horrid smell. Let's take a deeper dive and look at some of the most prominent cases over the years, starting with Vorstus. Polonus Vorstus is widely referred to as Subject Zero in this phenomenon, with his best known recording occurring almost 200 years after the said event. But hey, some have put their faith into far less in this wild game of historic telephone we play. Vorstus's 1470 case is widely known for its 1641 recording in Danish physician Thomas Bartholin's book Historiarum Anatomicorum Rariorium, which was a strange collection of medical phenomena. In his narrative, he explains that Vorstus was an Italian knight living in Milan, Italy in 1470 when his case of spontaneous human combustion took place following a night of drinking. Before his untimely demise, he was drinking large amounts of wine, which was not out of the ordinary for him. Sometime during his consumption, but before his combustion, he felt a strong fiery pain begin to grow in his chest, throwing him into a coughing fit. His cough erupted into what was described as a vomit of flames that eventually consumed his entire body into a burst of fire. If this doesn't scream foul play, a hex, and an evil court wizard, I don't know what else does. However, the fact that this strange medical experience became an historic occurrence causes us all to wonder what exactly our bodies are capable of. If we flash forward to the 18th century, we discovered the 1725 case of Nicole Millet, recorded by French author Jonas Dupont in his 1763 De Icridis Corporis Humani Spontaneis, his collection of cases and studies on the subject of spontaneous human combustion. What is significant about this case is the theory was used as a defense and alongside a testimony helped to prove her husband's innocence. Her case goes like this. Millet's husband, an innkeeper, was awoken one night to the smell of smoke. When he rushed to the source, he found his wife Nicole reduced to ash, and oddly enough, the straw bed which she was laying upon in the surrounding area remained unscathed. All that remained of Millet was her skull and some bones from her lower back and legs. A constant characteristic among cases, she was allegedly an alcoholic. As if her death wasn't traumatizing enough, Her husband would stand trial for murder and was initially found guilty. With much ambition, he fought the verdict, claiming the death was caused by spontaneous human combustion, which was backed by the testimony of surgeon Dr. Claude Nicolas Lacat, who had been staying at the inn the same night, leading to Mr. Millet being acquitted. At the later end of the 19th century, we find the case of Matilda Rooney. Rooney's case occurred on Christmas Eve, 1885, in the small farming town of Seneca, Illinois. Just prior to her event, the Rooneys and a farmhand shared a pleasant evening of relaxation, whiskey drinking, and friendship to bring in the holiday. Sometime after the farmhand had parted for the evening and Mr. Rooney had settled in for the night, Mrs. Rooney spontaneously combusted while sitting alone in the kitchen. The fire was overwhelming, consuming all of her body, only leaving behind a few bone fragments, all while the fire stayed confined to her body, leaving the rest of the room untouched. Unfortunately, the deathly occurrence didn't end there. Her husband, who rested in another room in the house, succumbed to suffocation from fumes of his deceased wife's body. The 1966 case of Dr. Irving Bentley is the catalyst for my interest in spontaneous human combustion. Growing up in Coudersport, PA, more than 30 years after the event, I constantly heard whispering debates about the true possibilities of Dr. Irving Bentley's death, convincing me that even almost 500 years after Polonus Vorstus, with all the advancements in medical discoveries, we still wonder about the true possibilities of the human body, caught in the fringe between fact and fiction. Dr. Irving Bentley was a family doctor who served the Coudersport area between 1925 and 1953. After his retirement, he lived a typical quiet small-town life in his two-story home on North Main Street. Since the gas meter for his home was located in his basement, there was a spoken agreement with North Penn Gas Company that they were allowed to enter his home when needed for a meter reading. This was all fine and dandy until one fateful morning on December 5th, 1966. On the morning of December 5th, Don Gosnell, like any time before, let himself into Dr. Bentley's home around 9 a.m. for his usual meter reading. Upon reaching the basement, he was overwhelmed by what he described as a sickly Swedish smell. Following his nose, it led him to an ominous pile of ashes in the middle of the floor. Tracing the trickling ashes from above, his eyes landed on a large hole in the ceiling, encircled by glowing embers. Gosnell rushed to the room he knew as the bathroom, shouting out Dr. Bentley's name in his pursuit, hoping for a response that unfortunately never came. When he arrived, so did the hideous truth. Dr. Bentley had been reduced to ash, leaving behind only his charred lower leg and a slippered foot. Oddly enough, his walker that he used to get to his master bathroom remained unscathed, tipped over next to a large hole burnt into the floor. Although the paint on the wall was charred black, it never blistered. All involved with the case believed that Dr. Bentley, being a smoker, may have caused the fire, but all were flustered at the fact that his walker remained unscathed, in a fire hot enough to reduce Dr. Bentley to mere ash. After his discovery, Gosnell ran a block to the North Penn Gas Company office, where the local volunteer fire department, the Potter County Deputy Coroner John Deck, and local mortician Richard Lendholm were all contacted and summoned. Once the smoke had settled, the Deputy Coroner delivered the following statement. "Looks like Doc Bentley was smoking his pipe. The pipe toppled over and spilled over the tobacco, and in the meantime, he fell asleep. When he woke up, he was on fire because some of the flannel nightshirt pieces fell on the floor as he went to the bathroom." Ultimately, though still highly debated, Dr. Bentley's death did not get labeled as a case of spontaneous human combustion, rather, the verdict of accidental death. Let's talk about some theories. How do scientists try to make sense of all the talk of this outlandish death? Well, by the way of the Wick effect theory. This theory is the highest regarded and most commonly approved amongst the science community. The basis of the idea is that the human body essentially acts like a candle, with its body fats and oils acting as the candle's wick. The body's oils are absorbed in the victim's clothing and hair. Then by way of an ignition source, as simple as a cigarette, the individual is set ablaze. Believers of this theory also argue that because the fire being so concentrated to the human body, it explains itself for the lack of additional fire damage to the room in which it occurs. Author and biology professor Brian J. Ford adds this to the argument. When a person is ill, they sometimes naturally produce traces of acetone in the body, and acetone is highly flammable. I experimented with the scale model humans using pig flesh that has been marinated in acetone. They burn like incendiary bombs. Alcoholism can cause people to produce acetone, as can many diseases. My conclusion is that unwell individuals produce high levels of acetone, which accumulate in fatty tissue and can be ignited, perhaps by a static spark or a cigarette. This ties in well to the previously conceived notion, mentioning similar characteristics among alleged cases, focusing on the alcoholic aspect. Whiskey burns, but not quite like this. Those who oppose the wick effect theory find credence in their argument for the possibility of spontaneous human combustion by claiming the blatantly obvious. They argue that the human body must achieve a temperature of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to be reduced to mere ash, as seen in almost every case. To put this into perspective, the cremation of the human body happens between the temperatures of 1400 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Moreover, they claim that the wick effect theory does not provide enough proof in its argument as to why the fire stays contained to the victim, while many house fires that result in total loss structural damage start from fires much smaller than the volume of a human body, and from there spread to consume the entire home. So what do you think? Is this just another one of the universe's greatest mysteries? Or is evidence from each alleged case being embarrassingly omitted? Even if the source of ignition and fuel can be poorly explained, what do you make of the well-contained fire that seems to only feed upon its victim? Will we ever really know the truth? Or will it forever remain one of the world's strangest medical phenomenons, lost among the annals of history? From Dracula to Bill Compton, Nosferatu to Edward Cullen, over the centuries, vampires have proven to be transformative. What was originally an animalistic monstrosity, worthy of a pitchfork torch-wielding mob, ready to stake it where it stood, has since become a unique option for a high school love interest that sparkles in the sun. With the rise of vampire-based romantasy in the early 2000s, talk about range, but what's all the fuss about? How exactly did the modern belief of vampires come to be? Just how far back do we have to traverse the wheel of time to find its planted roots? And better yet, is it possible that this fictional nightmare has a true chance of a real existence? Let's dive in, sift through the archives of lore, and find out just where the modern belief of the vampire originated from. But first, join me in the comment section and let's discuss our favorite vampires. I'll go first. My favorite vampire of all time is Kurt Barlow. Ring a bell, anyone? Before we begin, this video is directed towards the modern perception of the vampire based off literature and pop culture influenced by Eastern European folklore. I'll still pay homage to earlier inceptions of historical recordings of vampire-like figures, and my omission of other examples is not for ignorance of knowledge, just for the sake of the direction. Feel free to share all vampire folklore examples in the comments below. I'd love to cover them in a future video. For as long as the sun is hung overhead, and from the first time it settled, the existence of light and the absence thereafter has created uncertainty. We cling to the light of the day because it is known, and fear the darkness for that which lurks in the cloak it provides. With the evolution of life, the companionship of humanity, and the formation of the earliest civilizations, these shared fears developed into short-sighted reasonings that acted as answers to the unknown. The Sumerians of Sumer, the earliest known civilization, spoke of the Edimu, or the Akamu, one of the first incarnations of vampire-like beings. The spirit didn't just settle simply for one's blood. It played higher stakes. It fed upon one's soul. If this isn't terrifying enough, it was unobstructed in its pursuit, with the ability to defy the laws of physics by moving through walls, and once inside, used psychic control to hold a household hostage as it consumed all within. Staying within the ancient world, other areas of Mesopotamia tell stories of female demons, such as the Lilitu and Lamshtu, that feasted upon the blood of children and also filled the void as an explanation for stillbirths and unexplained illness. In Greek mythology, stories of the Lamia existed, a creature guilty of seducing and consuming men. If we step back and take a wider view at the common themes of these stories, we learn that they all share a similarity that we still hold the same concern for today: death, and what just happens when we pass on to whatever the afterlife may hold. Though these early examples of life or bloodsuckers serve a purpose to the society that they existed within, the modern perception of the vampire traces its roots closer to modern history in an area dubbed the cradle of vampire lore, Eastern Europe. The Eastern European countries that make up the cradle of vampire lore, commonly referred to Hungary, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania. Alongside real-life influences, folklore from this region gives an explanation for mysterious deaths and unexpected disease outbreak, all while building the foundations of traditional vampire tropes. Of the real-life influences, we find Elizabeth Bathory, better known as the Blood Countess of Hungary, who you might know from the story of the woman bathing in the blood of virgins to preserve her own beauty. Additionally, the story of the Romanian Vlad Dracula, better known as Vlad the Impaler, or simply Dracula, meaning the son of Dracul. Dracula is best known for his inspiration for the most known influence for the modern vampire, Count Dracula, from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. Although even before Stoker, in the actual Dracula, another influence existed that inspired the perception of Vlad Dracula, the Romanian folklore vampire, the Strigoi. The Strigoi originates from medieval Romanian folklore, and with it, a majority of long-standing terrifying vampire tropes. Even the meaning of the word Strigoi comes as a frightful twist. Adding in the translation of other neighboring countries, it only gets worse. In Romanian, the word is related to striga, which means scream, in Italian or Venetian, witch, and in French, it is related to the word strig, which means a bird woman who sucks the blood of children. Overall, in Romanian folklore, a vampire is simply a strigoi that possesses a bat, just as a werewolf is a strigoi that possesses a wolf. As defined by the 1882 novel Dentil Nil Papari Romana Inamomatri by Tedor Burada, one becomes a vampire in the following ways: by being the seventh child of the same sex in a family, by leading a life of sin, and by dying in any of the following manners: dying without being married, by execution for perjury, by taking one's life, or by dying while being cursed by a witch. Furthermore, once becoming a strigoi, one gains the superhuman abilities of transformation into an animal and invisibility, at the expense of a lustful desire for blood that can be paid by physically draining victims by biting them, or more tactful, through psychic absorption, giving all the more reason for this terrifying folklore to have some sort of defensive measure. According to Romanian folklore, to kill a strigoi, the following measures must be taken. Its body must be exhumed, its heart removed and cut in two, a nail driven through its forehead, and a clove of garlic placed under its tongue. These methods would be tried and true during the 18th century vampire panic. However, outlandish as they sound, some other methods for killing a strigoi include additionally smearing its body in pig fat from a pig killed on a certain gypsy holiday, as well as burying the body face down so it would be forced to head towards the afterlife. Enough about the strigoi. Let's talk about the vampire panic and the literature that developed from it that helped to shape the modern perception of the vampire. The Habsburg Empire, whose capital city was Vienna, Austria, is one of the greatest reasons why we see the modern vampire in such a way. Although the empire did not start the vampire panic of the 18th century, it had a direct hand in spreading the hysteria. In the early 18th century, the annexation of the Ottoman Empire's territory in the Habsburgs' farthest east brought more than just land expansion. With it, disturbing whispering, hushed gossip, and alarming stories quickly spread amongst the empire of creatures that lurked in the night, bringing a new sense to the word nightmare. All of which was convincing enough for the Habsburg Empire to send a military scouting party to investigate the distress. What they found was terrifying to say the least. Nick Groom, professor of English literature at the University of Macau and the author of The Vampire: A New History, had this to say about the Habsburg military investigation. In the 1720s, the military was sent to investigate what's going on, and in 1725, there's a report sent back saying that a body had been exhumed and staked and then cremated because it was terrorizing the local community. He also states that during this time, in 1725, the word vampire made its written debut. Thereafter, there was no controlling the frenzy as the fascination with the concept of vampirism rapidly spread across Europe, leading all walks of life carrying out investigations into alleged cases. With it, we gain medical explanations and common traits associated with vampirism we still subscribe to today. Prominent characteristics associated with vampires comes from the exhumation of one's body after death. When one dug up a suspected vampire to make sure it never walked the earth again, signs of natural decomposition were rudely mistaken for signs of continued life. These vamp hunters most certainly found hair and fingernail growth, receding gums that made the deceased teeth look that more terrible, and open mouths filled with blood, providing credence to the idea of bloodsuckers. Others might have found even more frightening, quote-unquote, evidence of life beyond death tied to a common medical ignorance of premature pronouncement of death that only added to the insanity when an extremely sick, belligerent drunk, or coma-stricken individual was buried well before their time. When these vamp hunters cracked open a deathbed, they might have found signs of struggle, broken and bloodied fingernails, and desperate claw marks on the lid of their coffin. By the mid-18th century, the Habsburg Empire made medical determinations debunking the vampire panic of Europe, providing logical reasoning why vampires were nothing more than folklore gossip and held no real threat. Pellagra, a dietary deficiency from corn-heavy diets that can cause extreme sensitivity to light and rabies, was offered as an explanation, which makes sense, as a widespread outbreak of rabies occurred in the 18th century during the height of the vampire panic. Still, this reasoning did not settle the popularity of vampires, and they soon found a new medium to eternally exist upon: literature. Obviously, without the lore and the quote-unquote true happenings, the idea of the vampire would not have existed. However, this alone may have sizzled out, becoming nothing more but lost grumblings of the past. What we should truly pay homage to for the modern incarnation of the vampire is without a doubt Gothic literature from the 18th and 19th centuries. Nick Groom, who we talked about earlier, and Stanley Stepanek, an assistant professor in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literature at the University of Virginia, explain it best. The vampire became more than just the idea of a night terror to be blamed for unexplained death due to the lapse in understanding of the spread of illness. What the vampire became was a symbol to explain a multitude of questions we all share and face as human beings. Groom explains the vampire as a sort of thought experiment that professionals across disciplines reflect upon in their respective moment in history as a way to understand things like the spread of infection or capitalist exploitation. Stepanek adds that vampires mirror human existence, explaining issues and anxieties. Let's dive into some of the most influential vampire-based pieces of Gothic literature. I'll leave it up to you to analyze surface-level details that help tell an underlying narrative relevant to their time. Heinrich August Osenfelder's 1748 poem, Der Vampire, is considered the first vampire poem. In it, a vampire narrator seduces an innocent maiden. John Polidori's 1819 The Vampire is considered the first vampire story. The mysterious aristocrat, Lord Ruthven, seduces a young woman, drinks her blood, and then disappears. This story adds the rich aristocrat trope to the long list of vampire traits. Bram Stoker's 1897 Dracula, although not the first, it is the most famous and influential vampire story, popularizing many vampire tropes including survival and destruction, aristocracy, and vampires being from Eastern European origins. The story follows the infamous Count Dracula, a vampire with supernatural abilities he uses to prey on the innocent. He was inspired by both Vlad the Impaler and Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Not literature, but still essential to the formation of vampire tropes. The 1922 film Nosferatu. To say it was inspired by Dracula would be too kind. It was a blatant ripoff, but served the purpose of introducing us to the vampire's vulnerability to light. Thereafter, the 20th century saw vampires transforming from animalistic predators to more human-like beings. This transformation happened over time with a long list of literature, TV, and films that helped to show vampires in a new light, but none was more influential to the development than Anne Rice in her 1976 novel, Interview with a Vampire. This novel alone introduced to the world that vampires could be just like us, gossip-driven and self-loathing. It also lessened physical vulnerabilities and made them more superhuman in both their abilities and appearance. Vampires now had super speed, heightened senses, and lustful beauty, being only vulnerable to daylight, fire, and the death of the first of its kind. This being the vampire that we all desire to become. Rice's influence did not stop there. It influenced the preceding transformative work of the early 21st century when vampires became a desirable star-crossed love interest, starting with the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer that ran from 1997 to 2003, featured main protagonist Buffy Summers, who happened to be a quote-unquote vampire slayer. Crazy, who would have guessed? Falls for a vampire named Angel. To the same theme, HBO's True Blood series, based off Charlaine Harris's Sookie Stackhouse book series, features multiple human-vampire relationships. Later in the mid-2000s, a new vampire romance born between vamps and teens, made popular by novels such as The Vampire Diaries by L.J. Smith and The Twilight Saga by Stephanie Myers. Although it seems that vampire romance completely outshines all else in modern times, it is easy to forget that during the rise of this niche, another ran parallel, vampires as unsung heroes. The 21st century also delivered us 3 Blade films that featured a half-human, half-vampire superhero, as well as multiple underworld films that told the story of an endless vampire-werewolf war and the return of Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Angel in a new light, in the main role in the show Angel as a private detective. Despite modern medicine completely debunking the possibility, pop culture twisting vampirism in every aspect, and our understanding that for the past 300 years, Gothic literature has used vampirism as an allegory for deeper societal struggles, we still can't help but obsess over the idea of true existence, and with good reason. Just when we think we have it all figured out, stories of alleged true encounters make us question our understanding of it all. Here are some stories for you to chew upon. Strigoi folklore tells of 2 prominent tales from the 17th and 18th century. First, that of Croatian Jur Grande, and secondly, the Serbian peasant Peter Baljojevic. Accounts tell that Jur Grande lived long after his death in 1656, for nearly 2 decades to be exact, where he terrorized the villagers of Istria nightly until his eventual beheading in 1672. Just as daunting is the case of Peter Blajojevic, who after his death in 1725 returned from the grave to kill 9 of his fellow villagers, one of which was his son. Blajojevic's case is said to be the most well-documented case during the vampire panic, with each of his alleged victims claimed to have been fed upon by Blajojevic the night prior to their deaths. When Blajojevic's body was exhumed, it showed clear signs of vampirism, which we know now as clear signs of the body naturally decomposing, though, at the time, worthy of a stake through the heart. Afterwards, the killings oddly ceased. Just as Eastern Europe is regarded as the cradle of vampire lore, Louisiana serves America equally so. Here among many, we find the stories of Jacques Saint Germain, Auguste Delagrange, and the Carter brothers. I'll cover each briefly, with the intent on deeper dives in the near future. Saint Germain's story far exists outside this one isolated incident, Louisiana just being a short chapter of the alleged eternal man. In the early years of the turn of the 20th century, this international man of mystery appeared in America's deep south in the town of New Orleans, leaving behind his former home in France. Here he brushed elbows with the city's rich socialites, throwing lavish parties, fully catered, and him the sole entertainer. Saint Germain told stories across history as if he was there to live them. He never ate, and notably only sipped what was presumed as red wine, only adding to his mystical characteristics. He claimed to be the descendant of the Count of Saint Germain, a famed 18th century adventurer, musician, and alchemist, among a plethora of other things. If his claim wasn't enough, his striking resemblance was uncanny, and life might have continued on as is if not for one fateful November night. On this night, a young woman was found injured outside of Saint Germain's home after having jumped from the second-story balcony to escape his clutches after he tried to feed on her. After taking the young woman to the hospital, the police paid Saint Germain a visit the next day. Their knocks were unanswered, so they let themselves in, finding a nightmare awaiting. Saint Germain was nowhere to be found, but what was made the young woman's outlandish story sound not so crazy. The police found uncountable bloodstains on the carpet and furniture throughout the home, no food or eating utensils, and large corked wine bottles filled with a mixture of human blood and wine. Saint Germain was never found, leaving those to wonder if he truly was a vampire. For all we know, he might still be rubbing elbows at lavish parties with the rich socialites of today. Auguste Delagrange was a serial killer who roamed the Louisiana nights of the early 1900s, where he claimed the lives of over 40 victims. Each of his victims shared the traumatizing characteristics of dismemberment and being drained completely of their blood, leading those to believe that Delagrange was anything but human, and more likely, a vampire. It would take the unlikely pair of a Roman Catholic and voodoo priest duo to finally bring the man down by driving a stake through his heart. The same stake that was sold at an eBay auction in the early 2000s. Although I can't find a final selling price, I'm sure it was a competitive bid. I mean, who wouldn't want to claim that they own a real vampire heart? Like Delagrange, John and Wayne Carter terrorized Louisiana by instilling fear through gruesome acts that could only be explained as otherworldly. They acted and operated during the Great Depression, feeding on victims they kidnapped and held captive in their home. They were eventually ousted in 1932 when one of their victims escaped. Following the victim's lead, 2 police officers visited the apartment in the 800 block of Royal Street at the corner of Rowan and St. Anne that she had escaped from. When they arrived, they found 4 other men and women bound to chairs, fed upon, and fighting for their lives. In another room, police found 2 decomposing bodies wrapped in white sheets. The victims told the police that 2 brothers, identified as John and Wayne Carter, who had abducted them, left every day at daybreak and returned in the evening to feed on them. On this information, the police decided to stake out the apartment with 8 police officers waiting to ambush the 2 brothers when they returned. They did just as so, and to their surprise, despite their small stature of only 5 foot 6 inches tall and 160 pounds, the 2 brothers put up a hell of a fight. When finally subdued, the 2 brothers begged the police to end them then and there because they were terrified of their own bloodlust, knowing that if they were not put down, they would only crave feeding again. The Carters would be executed, and depending on what account you subscribe to, the short of it is that when the brothers' crypt was visited only a year later, both of their bodies had vanished, paying credence to the belief that they were indeed vampires. So, what do you make of it all? Vampires. Once a catch-all to explain the ignorance of medical understanding, disease, and widespread illness, and a projection for our own fear of death. Then, an allegory for an abundance of philosophical, psychological, and societal struggles, transforming through a creative lens. Overall, the idea still captures our attention for its ability to be more than just human, fulfilling our own desires to be immortal. It also reminds us that the world is wide, human history is short. We are now, but what before? What after? Is it possible that vampires could be more than just a paranormal thought? Do they only exist because we allow them to? Or is there a true possibility, like our ignorance to reality once more, that we as human beings did not have everything figured out, and vampires live just outside our sense of reality?
The house stood quiet under the heavy tropical sky, its tin roof shimmering in the heat. In early 1998, 5 friends moved into this modest rented bungalow, expecting a peaceful life in the bush. Instead, they would endure a waking nightmare. In a dark twist of irony, Humpty Doo is the local slang for upside-down chaos, and soon their world would be turned upside down by an unseen force. One steamy January evening, a monsoon thunderstorm rolled in. The roommates gathered on the back patio to watch lightning fork across the horizon, with rain drumming on the corrugated metal roof. Thunder soon rattled the windows. None of them realized that inside the house, another kind of storm was about to begin. That night, amid the din of the storm, one of them heard an odd rattle overhead, something different from the rain. When the downpour subsided, they ventured into the kitchen and froze. A handful of small pebbles and seashells lay scattered across the floor, glistening wet. It was as if the rain had rained down straight through the ceiling. The ceiling, however, was intact, and the windows were shut. A chill soon crept over the friends. How had the stones fallen inside the house? In the days that followed, the mysterious disturbances escalated. At first, it was little things, faint thuds in empty rooms, objects found moved from where they had been left. And then one afternoon, a wine bottle launched off the countertop and shattered against a wall on its own. Soon, it was happening constantly. Knives, glass shards, bottle lids, and even kitchen pans were all hurled through the air without warning, often aimed directly at the occupants. There was no pattern to it. Whether it was morning or noon or the dead of night, something would crash or fly across the room at terrifying speeds. The housemates soon lived in a state of siege, hearts pounding at every unexplained thump. They would tiptoe through their own home, never knowing exactly when the next object might explode into motion. On several occasions, a sharp knife would suddenly impale itself into a wall, having missed a person's face by mere inches. What could possibly be doing this? There was never anyone else present, only an invisible assailant with a cruel sense of aim. Soon the haunting took an even stranger turn. One morning, one of the friends found something new waiting on the coffee table. Plastic letter tiles from their Scrabble game, arranged into a single word: fire. A day later, they discovered car spelled out on the kitchen counter with the same letters. Next came skin, laid neatly on the windowsill. Each word sent a bolt of dread through the household. It was as if something was leaving cryptic messages, one chilling word at a time. At first, the friends were merely perplexed. Fire, car, skin. What could these mean? But the puzzle pieces soon fell into place and filled them with another new fear. 2 months before the paranormal activity began, their close friend Troy had died in a horrific car accident. He was burned to death when a can of paint thinner exploded in his vehicle. The realization hit like an icy wave. These eerie Scrabble messages seemed to allude to Troy's terrible fate. The atmosphere upon the realization in the bungalow grew somber. Could it be Troy's restless spirit reaching out to them? The possibility was oddly comforting at first. the idea that their friend might be nearby in some form. But that hope quickly turned into terror. The violence of the disturbances was unlike anything gentle Troy would ever do. Why would his spirit hurl knives and smash bottles at people he cared about? One morning, as if to confirm their suspicions, the word Troy appeared on the living room floor. Any doubt that something otherworldly was at play vanished within that moment. Yet the question remained, was this really Troy's ghost, or something else using his name? Something more sinister. The mixed signals, personal messages intertwined with malice, left the friends trembling and uncertain. By now, word of the strange haunting had begun to spread beyond the little circle of friends. Curious neighbors, then local journalists and paranormal investigators showed up to see the phenomena for themselves. Most arrived skeptically, joking that the tenants must be imagining things. But even hardened reporters and investigators left the house pale and shaken, their skepticism shattered by what they had witnessed firsthand. Objects flew or crashed in front of their eyes with no one nearby. A TV news crew set up cameras in the living room, determined to capture proof of the poltergeist. But the entity wasn't about to make it easy. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. Cameras that had been working fine would suddenly power down or record only static at the crucial moment. It was as if the poltergeist refused to be caught on film, playing a twisted game of hide-and-seek with its observers. Frustrated, one cameraman commented that every time he hit record, the house fell eerily silent, only for the chaos to resume the minute the cameras were pointed away. The next morning, the residents found a new message spelled out on the floor in neat Scrabble letters that said, "No cameras." The entity had spoken, seemingly mocking their attempts to document it. This chilling intelligence, a sly awareness of their actions, sent a fresh wave of fear through everyone. The Humpty Doo poltergeist, as it was now being called, clearly did not want an audience. Weeks turned into months. The assault on the household continued relentlessly, and the list of witnesses grew with each passing week. Eventually, over 30 different people would see some manifestation of the haunting. The 5 friends were exhausted, frazzled, and desperate for help. Late one night, after a particularly violent day, they huddled together and made a plan. If this was something demonic or evil, perhaps a religious intervention could cleanse the house. They felt that they needed an exorcism. Not long after, the housemates awoke to a ghastly sight that seemed to confirm their worst fears. In the gray light of the dawn, they found a symbol crudely arranged on the ground in front of the house. Stones and pebbles laid out in the shape of a cross, alongside a 3-pronged trident. The implication was terrifying. A cross for Christianity, a trident, almost like the devil's pitchfork. Even the earth outside their door now bore the mark of some presence claiming its territory. That same morning, the shaken residents contacted local clergy. 2 priests, one Catholic, one Anglican, agreed to come and bless the troubled house. The priests arrived on a sweltering afternoon, armed with Bibles, holy water, and faith. The friends gathered around as the clergyman moved from room to room, murmuring prayers. At first, the house was still. The only sounds were the priest's low Latin incantations and the buzz of distant cicadas in the heat. Then, all hell broke loose. Without warning, a Bible flew out of one of the priest's hands, hurled by an invisible force. It hit the wall and fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Its pages were torn clean out. The priest gasped in shock. An instant later, the other priest let out a cry. An unseen hand had grabbed his arm and twisted it brutally behind his back, forcing him down to his knees. He strained as if wrestling with an invisible attacker, veins bulging, and his face contorting in pain. The housemates looked at one another in horror, unable to do anything. The clergyman staggered back, clearly overwhelmed. Their holy intervention had only angered whatever had lurked there. In fear for their lives, they quickly fled the house, one nursing an injured arm, and the other clutching his tattered Bible. Following their departure, the house fell eerily quiet, but the damage was done. The entity had made its point. No human, it seemed, could ever tame it. In the aftermath of this failed exorcism, the owner of the property turned on the tenants. The landlord was convinced that they must have been the one destroying the house with all of these antics, and with that conclusion, he moved to have them evicted. A legal battle ensued, dragging this bizarre haunting into the public eye. But when the case went before a judge, the testimony about flying objects and dozens of eyewitness accounts was so compelling that the court sided with the tenants, ruling that they were not responsible for the damage and that an unseen force was to blame. The official judgment astonished the community. By this point, however, the 5 friends had reached their breaking point. Less than a month after the court ruling, they had packed up their belongings and left the house for good. They had lasted 5 months in the grip of the poltergeist. 5 long months of fear, sleeplessness, and chaos, and they could take no more. On their final night in the bungalow, as they loaded the last boxes into their cars, the humid air felt unnaturally still. Not a single object moved inside the house. It was as if the entity was watching in silence, content now that its victims were conceding defeat. With the sunrise, the friends fled McMinn's Drive, leaving behind the accursed place that had nearly broken them. After their departure, an eerie peace settled over the property. The landlord made repairs, patching up holes in walls and replacing shattered windows, and gave the house a full renovation. Strangely, or perhaps not strange at all, once the original tenants were gone, the paranormal activity ceased entirely. The Humpty Doo poltergeist vanished as mysteriously as it had arrived. In the newly quiet rooms, there were no flying knives, no more phantom messages or raining stones. Whatever force that had terrorized the little blue bungalow seemed to have also moved on. Yet, the tale of what happened in the remote Northern Territory home would not be so easily forgotten. The ordeal left unanswered questions that haunted everyone who experienced it. Was it truly their friend's restless spirit crying out, or something far more sinister? To this day, the McMinn's Drive haunting remains a disturbing enigma. A lesser-known case, perhaps, but one of the best documented and most chilling hauntings on record. The surviving witnesses, dozens of them, can attest to an encounter with the unexplained that defied logic and shook them to their core. And for the 5 friends who lived through those months of horror, every so often, in the dead of night, memory plays tricks. A faint patter on the roof, or a flash of a shadow, will make their hearts race once again. They will never forget the entity, the unseen presence that came without warning and left without a trace, save for the enduring fear that it could one day return and wreak havoc on their lives once again. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this showcase. Please go and subscribe and show everyone in this video some love. I know we'd all greatly appreciate it. And I did also want to remind you guys that you can purchase any of my books, which each contain 10 real and terrifying paranormal cases or deep dives into notorious occult figures at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. You can also support me directly at patreon.com/mysteryarchives. There you can gain access to all my content ad-free and more. Other than that, everyone, I still have several more videos for you for the remainder of 2025, and I wish you all nothing but the absolute best. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Make sure to stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time.